Raphael Moretti leaned against the doorframe of the bridal suite, his voice carrying that particular brand of carelessness that belongs only to men who have never once been held accountable for anything. He was laughing. 3 hours before his own wedding, with his bride's best friend pressed against the wall beside him, he was laughing the kind of loose, comfortable laugh of a man who has already decided the outcome of every situation before it begins. "She'll walk down that aisle and smile pretty," he said. "That's what she does." Vivian Cross giggled, adjusting the strap of her dress, the same dress she'd picked out 3 weeks ago, while Alara stood beside her in the boutique, asking which color looked better. And if she finds out? Raphael's laugh got quieter, colder, then nothing. She won't do a damn thing. She's too weak for that. Outside the door, Alara Vaimont stood in her white silk gown and stopped breathing. If you've ever stood on the other side of a closed door and heard the voice of someone you trusted completely say something that rewired every memory you had of them, then you already know what happened to Alara in that hallway. You know how the body goes still before the mind catches up. You know the particular silence of a world rearranging itself. And if you've never been there, ask yourself right now, what would you do? Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because the stories we tell on this channel don't pull punches and they don't end where you expect. Drop a like and leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to Alara. She had known Raphael Moretti for 14 months. That wasn't a long time by most measures, but in the world Alara had grown up in the world of the Vaimont family, where alliances were currency and dinner table. Conversation was always half negotiation. 14 months was enough to learn everything you needed to know about a person, or so she had believed. Her father, Gerald Vaimont, had introduced them at a charity auction in Midtown Manhattan on a Thursday evening in October. Gerald had a way of making introductions that felt like business presentations. He'd said Raphael's name, stepped back exactly one pace, and then watched with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had already closed the deal in his head. Alara had shaken Raphael's hand and thought, he's handsome in the way that men who know they're handsome always are. A little too smooth. She hadn't been wrong about that part. What she'd gotten wrong, catastrophically, irreversibly wrong, was believing that smooth and dependable could coexist in the same man. She'd confused his composure for steadiness, his confidence for character, his attentiveness in those early months for something that actually meant something. He'd sent flowers to her apartment in the morning after their first dinner. Not a generic bouquet, he'd somehow found out she preferred wildflowers over roses, and the arrangement that arrived at her door looked like something pulled from a meadow rather than a florist's cooler. She'd stood in her kitchen holding them, genuinely surprised, and thought, maybe I was wrong about him. The moment. That was the one she'd return to, later, and understand for what it actually was, a man who was very, very good at learning exactly what a woman needed to see in order to believe what he wanted her to believe. 14 months, an engagement ring in December, a wedding date set for the following September, and then a hallway, a closed door, a voice. She's too weak for that. Alara didn't move for what felt like a long time. Later, she would be unable to say exactly how long she stood there. The cathedral was across the city. The ceremony was in 3 hours. Her maid of honor, Vivian, who had driven her to the dress fitting and held her hand when she was nervous and told her that Raphael was a good man, that Alara deserved this, that everything was going to be wonderful, was on the other side of that door, laughing softly at something Raphael had said. She pressed her back against the wall. The silk of her gown made a soft sound against the plaster. Neither of them noticed. She heard Vivian say something about the reception. She heard Raphael say he'd handle it. She heard the particular comfortable intimacy of two people who had been having a private conversation for a long time, the kind of conversation that has its own shorthand, its own rhythm, its own references to things that happened when no one else was watching. 6 months something in her mind said quietly, at least 6 months. She didn't know how she knew that. She just did. And then a cold, clear thing moved through her, not rage, not yet, but something that sat below rage and was in some ways more dangerous. Kind of precision, like a lens clicking into focus. She pushed off the wall. She walked away from the door. She did not make a sound. The estate where the pre-wedding preparations were being held belonged to the Moretti family, a sprawling property outside of the city where everything was catered and curated and controlled. The guest suites were in the East Wing. The bridal preparation rooms were on the second floor. The gardens ran along the south side of the building, formal and immaculate, and almost entirely empty on a morning when everyone's attention was directed inward. Alara walked into those gardens without thinking about where she was going. She walked until the sound of voices from the house faded, until she could hear birds, until she hit a stone bench tucked against a hedgerow and her legs simply stopped cooperating. She sat down. She put her hands in her lap and she looked at the engagement ring on her left hand, a cushion-cut diamond that had belonged to Raphael's grandmother. He'd told her part of the family history and she thought, did she exist? Or was that a story too? The tears came then. She hadn't expected them to. She was not by nature a woman who cried easily. Her mother had raised her in the particular Vermont tradition of controlled presentation, where emotions were something you processed in private and never, under any circumstances, allowed to disrupt the surface of things. It was a quality that Alara had spent years resenting and then, gradually, had simply absorbed. But the tears came anyway. Not the loud kind. The quiet, furious kind. The kind that feel like a physical betrayal, like her own body arguing with her. She let them fall for exactly as long as they needed to. And then she heard footsteps on the garden path. She looked up, expecting staff, expecting someone from the wedding party sent to find her, expecting almost anyone other than the man who actually appeared around the corner of the hedgerow. Dominic Moretti was 63 years old, though he carried it the way certain men do, not fighting it, not hiding it, just wearing it with the kind of authority that makes age look like an asset rather than a liability. He was tall, with gray at his temples and lines in his face that came from decades of making decisions under pressure. He was dressed in the morning's formal wear, though his jacket was open and his tie was loose, and he walked with the unhurried pace of someone who owned the ground he stood on because he did. He was supposed to be Raphael's best man. He stopped when he saw her. There was a beat where neither of them said anything. Alara registered that her face was wet, and she registered that she didn't particularly care. And she registered that this was Raphael's father, the man who had built everything the Moretti name stood for, the man her own father spoke about with a respect he reserved for very few people. Mrs. Vermont, he said, and his voice was quieter than she expected. Not gentle, exactly more like careful. The way a person speaks when they're aware that the wrong word could break something. Not yet, she said. He paused. Then I can come back. No. She shook her head. It's fine. Sit down if you want. He looked at the bench. He looked at her. He sat. For a while, neither of them spoke. It was Dominic who finally said, something happened. It wasn't a question. Alara considered lying. She was very good at it, not pathological, just practiced, in the way that everyone who grows up in a political household learns to manage information as a survival skill. She could have said nothing, just nerves. And he would have accepted it, and she would have been alone, with this thing for the next 3 hours, until she had to walk down that aisle. She didn't. She told him. She kept it factual. She didn't editorialize, didn't cry again, didn't perform any of the emotions she was feeling. She described what she'd heard through the door in the same tone she might have used to describe a business problem, because that was what it was, she'd decided. It was a business problem. She would treat it like one. Dominic listened without interrupting her once. When she finished, the garden was very quiet. He was looking at his hands, not at her, at his own hands, which were folded in his lap, and he was studying them the way people study things when they're not really looking at anything, but rather at something happening inside themselves. How long, he asked. I think 6 months, maybe more. He nodded slowly. Vivian Cross, he said, as if testing the name's weight. The maid of honor. She helped me pick the dress, Alara said. She told me it was the most beautiful dress she'd ever seen. Something moved through Dominic's face. It wasn't surprise, which told her something. It was more like a particular kind of exhaustion. The kind that comes from recognizing a pattern you've seen before. My son, he said finally, has always believed that consequences were something that happened to other people. He called me weak, Alara said. Dominic looked at her then, directly without any softening. I know, he said. It took her a second to register what that implied. You heard? No. But I'm not surprised he said it. He paused. I'm surprised he said it today. That should have ended the conversation. Dominic should have stood, expressed some appropriate regret, and walked back inside to manage whatever crisis was about to unfold. Alara should have sat alone for a while longer, and then made a decision, any decision, and carried it out. Instead, Alara said, I'm not calling off the wedding. Dominic looked at her steadily. If I walk away, she continued, he wins. My family loses the alliance, loses face, and Raphael gets to spend the rest of his life believing I was exactly what he said I was. She turned the ring on her finger. Not removing it, just turning it. I am not giving him that. Then what are you giving him? The question landed with an odd precision, like he already suspected the answer she was moving toward. Alara said it anyway. I want to marry into the Moretti family today. I want to honor the alliance my father negotiated, and the commitments that were made. She met his eyes without flinching. I just don't want to marry Raphael. Dominic was very still. I want to marry you, Alara said. She watched him process it. She'd expected shock. She'd expected him to stand up, to say something firm about propriety or madness, or the impossibility of what she was suggesting. She'd expected resistance, because what she was proposing was objectively insane, and she knew it. What she got instead was silence. And then very slowly something shifted behind his eyes. You've thought this through, he said. I had about 4 minutes, she admitted. But yes. He looked back at the house, at the windows where people were moving around, getting ready, preparing for a ceremony they were about to attend. He looked at the grounds, at the cars arriving in the distance, at everything he'd built. What you're proposing, he said carefully, isn't just a personal decision. It restructures everything. The alliance, the family hierarchy, Raphael's position. I know. It humiliates my son in front of every significant family on the East Coast. Yes, you understand that he will not forgive this. I understand that I don't care, Alara said. Dominic exhaled. Not quite a laugh, something drier, more private. He studied her for a long moment in the September morning light, and Alara let him look. She didn't arrange her expression into anything. She just let him see what was actually there. You're not weak, he said finally. I know. He misjudged you badly. Most people do. She paused until they don't. He asked her 2 more questions. The first was about her father, whether Gerald Vaymont would consent to the change. Alara said she would handle her father. She said it with enough certainty that Dominic didn't push further, which told her that he understood what she was, at least in part, before she'd walked into this garden. The second question was simpler and harder at the same time. Why me, he asked, not just as a Moretti, as the specific person. Why is this proposal directed at me? She'd expected the first question. She hadn't expected the second one. She thought about it honestly. Because you listened to me just now, and you didn't try to fix it, or minimize it, or tell me what I should feel about it. You just listened. She paused. And because Raphael told me, 3 weeks ago, that you built this family from nothing. That you were the one who turned a small operation into something that commands respect across 6 states. And when he said it, he didn't sound proud. He sounded resentful. Dominic said nothing. A man who resents the person who gave him everything, Alara said, is a man who's never had to build anything himself. And I have no interest in spending my life propping up someone like that. The garden was quiet. You, she said, built something. That tells me something about you. Dominic stood. He straightened his jacket, a precise, habitual gesture that was probably unconscious. He looked at the house again. He looked at Alara. I'll need to make a phone call, he said. There are documents. The marriage license is in Raphael's name. How long do you need? 40 minutes, maybe less. He paused. You should go back inside. Act normal. Normal, she repeated. Composed, he corrected. Act composed. You're good at that. How would you know? Because you've been sitting in a garden for the last 20 minutes with a destroyed marriage on your hands, and your dress is still perfect and you haven't screamed once. She almost laughed. She didn't, but it was close. Vivian will be looking for me, she said. Then let her find you. He looked at her with something close to respect, or maybe it was simply recognition. She doesn't know that anything has changed. Use that. She went inside. She climbed the stairs to the bridal preparation rooms, and she opened the door, and Vivian Cross was standing exactly where she'd left her, holding a blush brush and a small compact mirror, wearing the rose gold bridesmaid dress they'd chosen together on a Tuesday afternoon 6 weeks ago. Vivian looked up. There you are, I was wondering where you went. The photographer wants to do some getting ready shots before. She stopped. Alara. Your eyes are nerves, Alara said. She moved to the vanity and sat down in front of the mirror. She looked at her own reflection, steady, clear. Can you fix the mascara? Vivian came closer with the compact, gentle, careful. Her hands were completely steady as she touched up the corners of Alara's eyes. She's good at this, Alara thought. She's very, very good at this. Better? Vivian asked. Much better, Alara said. Thank you. She met her own eyes in the mirror and kept her face completely still. The next hour moved the way hours do when you know something that no one else in the room knows. Slower than normal, louder than normal. Vivian talked too much. Alara noticed that now, the way she'd never noticed it, before filling every silence with chatter, with reassurance, with small observations about the other bridesmaids and the flowers and the caterer. Alara responded where responding was necessary and let the rest wash over her. Her phone buzzed once, a text from an unknown number. Documents adjusted. 40 guests minimum to witness. Ceremony stands D. She read it twice, deleted it. Vivienne came to adjust her veil, fingers moving through the silk fabric with practiced ease, and Alara watched her friend's face in the mirror, her careful, beautiful, treacherous friend's face, and felt something she hadn't expected. Not hatred, not even anger exactly, something quieter. Grief, she realized. Not for the marriage she was about to not have. For this woman who had been in her life for 6 years, and had known, and had smiled, and had held the compact, and touched up her mascara 20 minutes ago. That was the part that would stay. Not Raphael. Raphael was a lesson she should have learned faster. Vivienne was a loss. She didn't let any of it show. Her father arrived at 11:15. Gerald Vaimont was a compact, careful man who wore his emotions the way he wore his suits contained, pressed, not a wrinkle visible. He came into the preparation room and kissed Alara on the forehead and said she looked beautiful, and then Alara sent the other bridesmaids for coffee and closed the door. Told him. She told him everything she'd heard, everything she'd decided, everything that had already been set in motion. Gerald's face did a complicated sequence of things. Anger, calculation, more calculation. Then something that might have been, and this surprised her relief. Dominic Moretti, he said slowly. Yes, and he agreed. He did. Gerald sat down on the edge of the vanity chair. He rubbed the side of his jaw. This will cause problems with Raphael. Tended. His people. His people are also Dominic's people. Have been for 30 years. They'll follow Dominic. Gerald looked at her. Really looked. The way fathers look when they realize their children have become something they didn't entirely anticipate. When did you get this hard? He asked. About 90 minutes ago, she said. He let out a breath. Stood up. Straightened his jacket, the same habitual gesture Dominic had made. She noticed, and wondered if all men in powerful positions developed the same unconscious tells. All right, Gerald said, you have my support. I wasn't asking for it, Alarissa said. I was informing you. Gerald looked at her for another moment. Then he nodded, once. Good, he said, that's the right approach. At 11:45, Vivian helped Alara step into her shoes and gathered the train of her gown and said, for the third time that morning, that she looked stunning. Thank you, Alara said. Vivian, I just want to say thank you for being here today, for everything you've done. Vivian's face opened into a warm, genuine-looking smile. Are you kidding? This is what we do. This is what friends are for. Alara held her gaze for exactly 1 second longer than she needed to. Exactly, she said. The cars were waiting. The cathedral was across the city, and the drive took 22 minutes. And Alara sat in the back of the car with her father and looked out the window at September light falling across buildings and streets and strangers going about their mornings, and she thought about what she was about to do and whether she was, in some fundamental way, losing her mind. She didn't think she was. She thought she was, possibly for the first time in a long time, thinking with complete clarity. She thought about Dominic's voice in the garden, the way he'd processed everything she'd told him without flinching, without rushing to comfort her, without making any of it about himself. She thought about the question he'd asked, why me, and the fact that he'd asked it at all. A lesser man, a more arrogant man, wouldn't have needed to ask. He would have taken the offer as his due. Dominic had genuinely wanted to understand her reasoning. That told her something. She didn't know what the next year of her life was going to look like. She didn't know what Dominic Moretti was like behind closed doors, in the private hours, in the spaces that no negotiation or alliance could reach. She didn't know if what she was walking toward was better than what she was walking away from. She knew only that it was her choice. She had made it. She would live with it. The cathedral was full. She could see it from the car window as they pulled up the dark suits, moving through the entrance, the cluster of security on the steps, the long black cars lined up along the block. 300 people, minimum. Crime bosses and businessmen and political allies and family members, and all the complicated entanglements of a world where power was currency and marriage was treaty, all of them waiting for a wedding. They were going to get one. Gerald offered his arm as they moved into position in the vestibule. The music inside shifted the processional signal, the sound that meant, everyone stand. Something important is beginning. Ready? Her father murmured. Alara looked at the cathedral doors. Behind those doors was a room full of people who had come to watch her become someone's wife. Behind those doors was Raphael Moretti standing at the altar, confident and untouchable, believing with every cell of his body that she was going to do exactly what he expected her to do. Behind those doors was everything she was about to change. Yes, she said, the doors opened. The cathedral spread out before her, the candles, the flowers, the long central aisle, the 300 faces turning toward the entrance, and at the far end of that aisle, standing at the altar in a dark formal suit, not Raphael. Dominic Moretti looked back at her from the front of the church. His face was composed, steady, and absolutely certain. Raphael was standing 30 feet from the altar, still in his seat in the front pew, his face going from confident to confused to something that hadn't resolved itself into an expression yet. The murmur started at the back of the cathedral and rolled forward like a wave. Alara watched Raphael's face as understanding began to arrive there. She started walking. She walked down the aisle of that cathedral in her white silk gown and her stolen veil and her fixed mascara, and she did not rush, and she did not falter, and she did not look away from the man standing at the altar. Halfway down the aisle, she stopped. The murmur died. 300 people waited. Alara turned, slightly, so that her voice would carry, so that everyone in that room, every boss, every ally, every person whose respect Raphael had courted and cultivated, could hear exactly what she said next. She looked at Raphael. She told them everything. She told them about the door, about the voice, about Vivienne, about 6 months. She told them what he had called her. She watched the color leave his face. She watched his allies look at him. She watched the calculation moving through the room, the quiet, rapid recalibration of people who understood power, and were now measuring what it meant that Raphael Moretti had been stupid enough to give his bride a reason, and the intelligence to act on it. She turned back toward the altar. She kept walking. And when she reached the front of that cathedral, when she stood face to face with Dominic Moretti, in front of every person who mattered in both their worlds, she looked at him steadily, and she didn't smile, and she didn't perform anything. He held out his hand. She took it. Behind her, somewhere in the pews, she heard Raphael say her name once, sharply, with an edge of desperation that she recognized immediately as the voice of a man who has only just now understood that he is lost. She didn't turn around. The priest cleared his throat and began to speak. The priest's voice filled the cathedral like something that had been rehearsed 1,000 times and meant nothing until this exact moment. Dominic's hand was dry and steady in hers. That was the first thing Alara registered, not the noise behind her, not the 300 people rearranging themselves in their seats like a flock of birds disturbed by a stone, not Raphael's voice cutting through the murmur with her name, sharp and furious and completely ignored. Just the steadiness of that hand. She focused on it. The priest, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses, who had clearly been briefed on the change of groom and had processed it with the professional composure of someone who had seen stranger things in 40 years of ceremony, spoke the opening words with careful neutrality. He did not look at the congregation. He looked at the 2 people standing before him, and he proceeded. Raphael did not stay in his pew. She heard him before she saw him, the sound of a body pushing past people, of fabric against fabric, of someone who had decided that his outrage was more important than the physical reality of 300 witnesses. He came around the side of the front pew and planted himself 10 feet from the altar, and his voice hit the cathedral acoustics and bounced off every surface. Stop. The priest stopped. Dominic did not turn around immediately. He took one breath, measured and deliberate, and then he turned. Alara turned with him because she was holding his hand, and she was not letting go of it. And what she saw when she looked at Raphael Moretti, for the first time since the hallway, was a man who had walked 3 steps past anger and arrived somewhere more dangerous. Raphael's jaw was tight. His eyes were moving too fast from his father's face to hers, to the priest, to the room, and back again, calculating and recalculating. His morning suit was perfect. His hair was perfect. He looked exactly like a man who had prepared for a wedding and arrived at a catastrophe, and the gap between those 2 things was doing something to him that his composure couldn't fully contain. "Dad," he said. The word came out clipped. "I need you to step away from that altar." Dominic said no, one word. Quiet enough that the front rows had to lean forward to hear it. Quiet, the way certain things are quiet when they don't need volume to carry weight. Raphael's throat moved. "This isn't you don't understand what you're doing." I understand exactly what I'm doing. She told you whatever she told you, Raphael. Dominic's voice dropped half a register, and it was the kind of drop that meant something. The kind that Alara suspected had stopped conversations cold for 30 years. This is not the place. You're at my altar with my bride. She is not your bride. Dominic said it simply, without heat, which made it worse. She made that decision herself. I didn't take anything from you. You gave it away. The murmur in the cathedral swelled. Raphael heard it. Alara watched him hear it, watched the awareness move across his face, that every person in that room was processing this, measuring it, filing it. He looked at her then, really looked, the way he hadn't looked at her in months, the way you look at someone when you've been treating them as furniture, and suddenly the furniture has rearranged the entire room. Alara, he said. His voice shifted just slightly. Less fury, more something careful. Whatever you think you heard. I heard you clearly, she said. The door was thin. His face went through 3 things in fast succession. She watched all 3 of them. Come outside with me, he said. 5 minutes. Just no. Alara, Raphael. She kept her voice level, which cost her more than she let show. Sit down. Something cracked behind his eyes. Not grief. Raphael Moretti was not grieving her. She understood that completely. What cracked was his certainty. His absolute, foundational certainty that she would not do this, could not do this, was not the kind of person who did things like this. The man who had called her weak was standing inside the ruins of that assumption, and not yet understanding the full dimensions of it. He looked at the room again. She watched him count the faces, watched him find his allies and read their expressions, and register the particular quality of silence from men who respected strength and were recalibrating where it currently lived in this room. Stepped back. He didn't sit down. He stood to the side of the front pew, with his arms rigid at his sides and his face locked into something that was working very hard to look like contempt and only partially succeeding, and he watched. The priest, with the remarkable composure of someone being paid to hold a ceremony together, regardless of what happened around it, resumed. The vows were not the original vows. Dominic had clearly made some adjustments in the 40 minutes between the garden and the altar, because what the priest read aloud was simpler and more direct than the elaborate language Alara had spent 3 weeks refining with Raphael. It was the language of something agreed upon quickly, under pressure, by 2 people who had decided to not dispense with ornamentation. She found she preferred it. When it came to the ring, there was a moment brief, practically invisible to anyone not paying close attention, where Dominic reached into his jacket pocket and produced a plain band that was clearly not the ring that had been planned for this ceremony. It was a man's ring, resized, or perhaps something sourced in those 40 minutes, by someone who was good at sourcing things quickly. Alara looked at it and thought, he handled everything, and felt something about that she filed away to examine later. Slid it on. It fit. She did not look at the congregation during the ceremony. She looked at Dominic because he was looking at her, and because looking elsewhere felt like a concession she wasn't prepared to make. His eyes were gray and direct and entirely present, in a way that Raphael's had never been. Raphael's attention always had a quality of slight distraction, of management, of a man running 3 conversations simultaneously and giving you the part that served his current purpose. Dominicson was simply looking at her. When the priest pronounced them married, the room did not applaud. It was quiet for a moment, a genuine, unplanned silence that felt like the sound of 300 people trying to figure out how to process what they'd just witnessed. Then Gerald Vaymont started clapping from the front row. Deliberate, measured. A man making a statement. 2 other people joined him. Then more. It wasn't enthusiasm. It was acknowledgement. The difference mattered. Raphael turned and walked out of the cathedral. Vivian Cross, Alara noticed, was gone from her bridesmaid position. She hadn't watched her leave. She'd simply vanished at some point between Alara's announcement midway down the aisle and the end of the ceremony, and her absence was now a gap in the row of rose-gold dresses that everyone was carefully not looking at. The reception was held at the estate. This had always been the plan, the ceremony at the cathedral, then back to the Moretti grounds for the dinner and the dancing and the long, expensive machinery of a wedding celebration that had been months in the planning. The fact that the groom had changed did not change the venue, did not change the caterers or the flowers, or the seating charts that were now quietly, frantically being adjusted by someone on staff who had clearly been told to handle it. Alara moved through the cocktail hour with Dominic beside her, and she was aware, acutely, of the specific quality of attention they were receiving. Not hostility, at least not openly. Something more complicated. The powerful families who filled the Moretti estate on a September afternoon were all, in their own ways, students of power, and what they were doing was studying the shift. 3 men from the Castellano family approached within the first 15 minutes. They were polite, careful. They offered their congratulations with the particular precision of people who wanted to be remembered as having been gracious early, before the new arrangement's stability was confirmed. Dominic received them with the ease of a man who had been navigating these exact waters for decades. He introduced Alara without qualification, without apology, without any of the explanatory language that might have suggested the morning's events required justification. He simply said her name and what it was now, and left the men to make of that what they would. Alara watched him do it and learned something. She was also watching the room for Raphael. He hadn't come back to the reception yet. His absence was its own statement. Either he was regrouping, or he was making arrangements, or he was simply sitting somewhere on the estate consuming whatever he consumed when things went badly wrong. She didn't know him well enough, she realized. She had known the performance of him. She had not known what he did when the performance failed. She was about to find out. He came through the reception hall doors at 6:47. Alara knew the time because she was standing near the bar with her father when the energy in the room changed, the specific, directional shift of 300 people becoming collectively aware of a presence, the way water moves when something large enters it. Raphael came in alone, no, not alone. He came in with Vivian Cross 2 steps behind him, and Vivian had removed the bridesmaid dress and was wearing something that Alara didn't recognize, a dark wrap dress that she must have had somewhere in her things. And her face was arranged into an expression of careful defiance that looked like it was costing her significant effort to maintain. Raphael looked like he'd had 40 minutes to be furious and had used them well. His jacket was gone. His tie was loosened. His face had settled into something harder than the raw shock in the cathedral, something more purposeful. He crossed the reception hall toward Dominic. People stepped aside. Not dramatically, just the unconscious, physical acknowledgement of a room that understood something significant was about to happen. Alara moved before her father could stop her. She crossed the room at an angle that would put her beside Dominic before Raphael reached him, and she was aware of Gerald making a sound behind her, and she did not stop. She reached Dominic's side at the same moment Raphael did. The 3 of them stood in the middle of the reception, with the room arranged around them like an audience that had been waiting for the second act. "Dad," Raphael said. "Raphael, I want to talk. We're talking." Raphael's eyes flicked to Alara. Something in them that wasn't quite contempt, more like the specific irritation of someone who has miscalculated an obstacle. "Privately, no," Dominic said. Raphael's jaw tightened. "There are things that need to be discussed. About the family, the business. There are always things that need to be discussed about the business. That hasn't changed. My position has changed." Raphael stopped. He looked at the people around them, measuring how much to say, and Alara watched him do it and recognized the calculation. "You've made a decision today that affects the structure of everything we've built." "A decision was made," Dominic said. "I agreed to it." "Different." Raphael looked at her again. "You manipulated him." The word hit the air between them. Alara said, "I told him the truth. What he did with it was his choice. You gave him a version of—" "I told him exactly what I heard through the door, word for word." She held Raphael's gaze without any difficulty, which surprised her slightly. She thought this moment would feel harder. "If you'd like to dispute the accuracy of the transcript, go ahead." The room was very quiet. Vivian, standing 2 feet behind Raphael's right shoulder, had her eyes fixed on a point slightly above Alara's head, which was either cowardice or strategy, and Alara hadn't decided which. Raphael turned back to his father. The calculation in his eyes had shifted into something more deliberate. "What happens to my position? In the family? In the business?" "Nothing changes today," Dominic said. "And tomorrow?" "Tomorrow depends on tomorrow. That's not an answer. The only one you're getting right now." Raphael breathed in through his nose. Long, controlled. The breath of a man working very hard not to say the thing he most wants to say. "I want a meeting. Tomorrow morning. Before you make any further decisions about restructuring." Dominic looked at him for a long moment. "Fine, 9 o'clock. Raphael nodded once. He looked at Alara again, and what was in his face now was less readable, layered, compressed. Something working below the surface that hadn't resolved yet. "Congratulations," he said. The word was completely flat. He walked away. Vivian followed him without meeting Alara's eyes. The reception continued. This was perhaps the strangest thing about the evening, the way it simply continued. The catering staff circled with trays. The string quartet, who had presumably been briefed on nothing and were just doing their jobs, played through their scheduled set. People ate and drank and had conversations, and the wedding that had inverted itself 3 hours ago carried on into the September evening with the stubborn momentum of an event that had cost a great deal of money and was therefore going to happen regardless. Alara drank 1 glass of champagne and then switched to water. She needed to think clearly tonight. She needed to think clearly for a long time after tonight, and she was aware that the champagne was a temptation, the pure animal desire to blunt the day's edges, and she wasn't going to give in to it. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. She sat with Dominic at what was still called the head table, because no one had changed the name, and she observed the room in the way she'd been trained to observe rooms since childhood. Who spoke to whom? Who avoided whom? Who came to the head table and who found reasons not to? The social geometry of power shifting in real time. Castellano men came back again. Others followed. The pattern was clear enough. The families who had the most to gain from stability were aligning early. The ones who had invested specifically in Raphael were taking longer. "You're mapping it," Dominic said quietly. He was looking at his own glass, not at her. His voice was low enough that only she could hear it. "The room," she said. "Yes. What are you seeing?" "The Ferreira people haven't approached. The 2 men in the corner by the east windows, they've spoken to 3 people in the last hour, and every one of them left the conversation looking uncertain." Dominic's expression didn't change. "The Ferreira family has an arrangement with Raphael that predates my involvement in that particular alliance. It's a financial arrangement, meaning you don't control it, meaning it's Raphael's to hold or lose." Alara considered that. "Is it significant?" "If he loses it, yes. If he holds it, it becomes a leverage point." He finally looked at her. "Picked that up fast." "I grew up at my father's dinner table," she said. "This isn't so different." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Not quite. Give it a month, it gets different." She thought about asking what he meant. She decided to wait instead. Gerald found her near the doors to the garden at 8 o'clock. The evening had cooled significantly, and some of the guests had moved outside, and Alara had drifted toward the edge of the indoor space in the way she always did at large gatherings, not antisocial. Just aware of her own need for an inch of margin, a breath of space between herself and the noise. Her father looked tired. He was good at not looking tired in public, but she'd been reading him her entire life, and she could see it in the set of his shoulders. "You doing all right?" he asked. "Ask me in a week." Gerald nodded. He looked out over the garden, where lights were strung between the trees, and people moved in small clusters in the early dark. "Dominic Moretti," he said. "Not with judgment more, with the quality of a man turning a name over in his hands, checking its weight." "I know what you're thinking," Alara said. "You don't. You're thinking about the age difference. I'm thinking about 30 years of working adjacent to that man, and never once fully understanding what he wants." Gerald paused. "Which is either a quality you can work with or a problem you can't solve." "I haven't decided which." "He's honest," Alara said. "He didn't try to talk me out of it or into it. He asked questions, and he listened to the answers. That's a low bar after Raphael. It's a different bar, not a low one." She turned to look at her father fully. He held every room in that cathedral today without raising his voice once. Raphael was louder than him by a factor of 10 and commanded 1/10 of the attention. You know what that means. Gerald was quiet. "I learned that from you," she said, "watching you work. The loudest person in the room is almost never the most dangerous one." Her father looked at her for a long moment. "Don't confuse dangerous with trustworthy." "I'm not. I'm confusing dangerous with capable. The trust is something I'll have to determine over time." She looked back at the garden. "Same as he will with me." Gerald made a sound that held several things in it at once. Agreement. Worry. Something that might have been pride, though he would never have named it that. "Raphael won't let this go quietly." "I know. He has people. Resources that are nominally part of the family operation, but that he's been building as his own, separately, for at least 2 years." This was new information. She looked at her father. "How long have you known that?" Gerald's expression answered before he did. "Dad, I suspected. I didn't know." "Did you suspect before or after you agreed to this alliance?" He held her gaze. "Does it change what you did today?" Thought about it honestly. "No, then we're not going to fight about the timing," he said. It wasn't a comfortable answer. She filed it. At 9:15, she found Vivienne. This was not accidental. Alara had tracked her through the evening the way Vivienne had moved through the reception in Raphael's orbit. always within 10 feet of him. Her body language, a careful performance of solidarity that kept slipping. The moments when Raphael turned away from her, and she stood alone for a few seconds, with her face doing something unguarded. Elora found her in the hallway outside the East Powder Room, phone in hand, typing something with the focused urgency of a person managing a crisis. Vivienne looked up. The performance came back immediately, the careful, composed face, the neutral expression. But it took a half-second longer than it should have. "Ilara," she said. "Vivienne." They looked at each other. 6 years, Ilara thought. 6 years of lunches and phone calls, and 2 in the morning conversations when things were hard, and birthday dinners, and the weekend in Charleston when Vivienne's first long relationship ended and Ilara had driven 4 hours to be there. 6 years of what Ilara had believed in good faith was one of the few completely honest things in her life. "I'm not going to do this here," Vivienne said. Her voice was steady, which cost her something Ilara could see the cost. "I'm not asking you to do anything," Ilara said. "I just want to know one thing." Vivienne waited. "Did you tell him things?" Ilara asked. "About me. Things I told you. Things I said about the marriage, about my doubts, about—" She stopped. "Did you use what I gave you?" The half-second pause before Vivienne answered was its own answer. "It wasn't like that," Vivienne said. "What was it like?" "Complicated. Raphael and I don't want the story about Raphael," Ilara said. "I want the answer to the question I asked." Vivienne looked at the floor. "Some things came up. In conversation. I wasn't deliberately," Ilara said. Vivienne looked up. "Okay? I have what I needed." Ilara turned to go. "Ilara." Vivienne's voice cracked slightly on the second syllable. "I'm sorry." Ilara stopped. She didn't turn around. She stood in the hallway with her back to the woman who had been her best friend, and she let the words sit there in the air between them. "I know you are," she said finally. She walked back to the reception. She did not go looking for Vivienne again that evening. The guests began to leave around 10. The organized, gradual departure of people who had fulfilled their social obligations and were ready to process everything they'd witnessed in the privacy of their own cars. Ilara stood near the entrance with Dominic, and they received the goodbyes, some warm, some formal, some barely concealing the desperate curiosity of people who wanted to ask questions they knew they couldn't. When the last significant family left, when the reception hall had thinned to staff and a handful of stragglers, Ilara let herself drop into a chair at the nearest table and stare at the ceiling for approximately 30 seconds. Dominic sat down across from her. She looked at him. He looked at her. "How are you doing?" he said. It wasn't entirely a question. "I genuinely don't know," she said. "Ask me again in the morning." He nodded. He poured water from the table carafe into a glass and set it in front of her without comment. She drank it. "Raphael has a meeting scheduled with the Ferreira people," Dominic said. "Not tomorrow, tonight. I found out an hour ago." Ilara set the glass down. "Tonight. 11 o'clock. The information came from someone reliable. She processed that. He's moving fast. He always moves fast when he's backed into a corner. It's one of his consistent patterns." Dominic's voice had no particular emotion in it, the tone of a man just describing observable facts about weather or terrain. "He has an asset that I don't fully control. He's going to try to use it before the situation solidifies." "What asset?" "Financial records," Dominic said. "From a period about 8 years ago. There were some arrangements with certain federal contractors that were—" He paused, choosing. "Ambiguous." Ilara looked at him. "Ambiguous. The kind of ambiguous that becomes very unambiguous with the right framing and the right audience." The implication settled through her in layers. "He's been holding that. For at least 2 years. I've known he had it. I didn't know when he'd decide to use it. And now he's going to use it because of today. He's going to threaten to use it," Dominic said. "At 9 tomorrow morning. In my office, he's going to sit across the desk from me and tell me that if I don't restore his position as head of the family operations and publicly step back from this marriage, he will take those records to people who will know what to do with them." Ilara stared at him. "You knew this was coming," she said. "I anticipated it was possible. Before the garden. Before I even—" She stopped. "You knew this was a risk when you agreed to what I proposed." "Yes. And you agreed anyway." "Yes." She sat with that for a moment. The evening sounds of the estate, settling around them, the caterers in the kitchen, the distant sound of a car leaving, the night birds outside. "Why?" she asked. Dominic looked at her directly. "Because my son has had that leverage for 2 years and hasn't used it, which means he's been waiting for the right provocation. If I'd spent the rest of my tenure managing around his patience, eventually something would have provoked him, anyway. At least this way," he paused. At least this way I chose the moment. You chose me, Alara said slowly this morning. In the garden. You weren't just responding to my proposal. You were also making a decision about when to force this. Dominic said nothing, which was its own answer. She felt something shift, not betrayal, not quite, but a recalibration. She had thought she was the one making the move this morning. She had thought the initiative was hers, and it was she didn't doubt that he'd agreed to her proposal rather than constructing it, but she understood now that she had been a piece moving on a board that was already in play. She needed to decide how she felt about that. The records, she said. Can they hurt you? Yes. Badly, badly enough. Can they be neutralized? Dominic's expression changed slightly, a controlled shift that told her she'd landed on the right question. There's someone who has had a parallel interest in those records for about 5 years. A federal investigator named Carla Mendez. She's been building a case against the Ferreira family, not the Moretti family, and she's been slow about it because she's thorough. Those records reach her before they reach anyone Rafael controls. They become a weapon against the Ferreira family instead. They become leverage, Dominic said, used correctly. Alara looked at the table, at the water glass. At her own hands in their white silk, she was still in her wedding gown. She realized had been in it for 12 hours, and the thought arrived with a kind of absurdist clarity that almost broke through her composure. You need someone to make contact with Mendez, she said. Not you. Not anyone directly connected to the family name. Dominic waited. My father, Alara said. He has an attorney who has done federal consultation work. There's a path there that doesn't trace back to you. I know about the attorney, Dominic said. I've known for 3 years. I didn't want to use Gerald Vaimont as a conduit unless I was certain of the alignment. The alignment changed this morning. It did. They looked at each other across the table. You need to call my father tonight, Alara said. Before 9 tomorrow. If I call him tonight, it has to be with your knowledge. Given the circumstances going around you in the first 12 hours of this marriage would set a precedent I don't intend to set. She registered what he'd just said. You're asking my permission. I'm asking your participation. There's a difference. There was. She recognized it. She reached across the table and picked up his phone where it sat near the carafe, turned it so the screen faced him. Call him, she said. Dominic looked at the phone, then at her. He picked it up and found Gerald Vaimont's number. He had it, she noticed, and did not comment on this and pressed call. Gerald picked up on the second ring. I need 40 minutes of your time tonight, Dominic said, and your attorney's. I'll explain everything in person. He listened. 1 hour, he said, my office. He ended the call. He set the phone down. Go change, he said. You've been in that dress for 12 hours. Alara looked down at the white silk, at the ring on her hand that wasn't the ring she'd been planning to wear, at the entirety of the day, pressing against the inside of her chest. I don't have anything else here, she said. My things are, she stopped. Her things were in the room she'd been given as Raphael's future wife, a room that was now, by every measure, the wrong room. Dominic stood. He said, Come with me, in a tone that expected compliance without demanding it, and she stood and followed him, because she was too tired and too sharp, and too many things at once, to do anything else. They crossed the estate through back corridors, away from the remaining staff, and he brought her to the east wing, the family wing, not the guest wing, and opened a door to a room that was clearly not a guest room. Large windows, built-in bookshelves, furniture that had been chosen for use rather than impression. There was a closet. In the closet there were women's clothes. She looked at them, then at him. My daughter visits 4 times a year, he said. She leaves things. She's roughly your size. He paused. She also knows about today. I called her this afternoon. She said, and I'm quoting accurately, it's about time someone checked him. Alara stared at the closet. Your daughter, she said. Sophia. She's 31. She lives in Barcelona. She's the only person in the family who's been openly telling me that Raphael's judgment was compromised for the better part of 2 years. She knows about the Ferreira arrangement? She knows about everything, Dominic said. She's the smartest person in this family, and I have spent 3 years not listening to her stir as carefully as I should have. Alara looked at the clothes. She looked at the room. She looked at the man standing in the doorway, with his tie finally fully removed, holding it in one hand, watching her with the steady, direct attention she was already starting to calibrate herself against. Tell me one thing, she said. He waited. The records that Raphael is holding, the federal ones, the ambiguous ones from 8 years ago. She held his gaze. What actually happened 8 years ago? Dominic looked at her for a long time. I made a choice, he said. Between two bad options, under pressure, I won't pretend was exceptional. The choice I made was practical, and it worked, and it kept 37 people employed and out of federal custody. It was also by the strict letter of two specific statutes, something I cannot defend in a courtroom. Would you make the same choice again? He didn't hesitate. Yes. She turned back to the closet. Okay, she said. That's it, he said. You told me the truth when you didn't have to. Part I needed. She pulled a dark shirt from a hanger. Go make your call. I'll find you when I'm ready. She heard him leave the doorway. She heard his footsteps moving down the corridor. She stood alone in a room that wasn't hers, in a house that now technically was. On the first night of a marriage she had proposed in a garden, 3 hours before a ceremony with a man she had known, for approximately the length of one conversation. And she put her hand flat against the closet door and breathed. Once, twice. The door opened down the corridor. She heard Raphael's voice. Not in the room, somewhere below, somewhere in the house, carrying through the walls with the particular penetrating quality of a voice that was no longer trying to control itself. Couldn't make out the words. She didn't need to. She changed out of the white dress quickly, folded it over the chair because she couldn't bring herself to drop it on the floor. She was at the bedroom door in 4 minutes, with flat shoes and a borrowed shirt, and her own instincts telling her that whatever Raphael had just discovered, whatever had brought him back into this wing of the house at 10:30, on a night he should have spent regrouping, was something she needed to be present for. She opened the door, the corridor was empty, but the voice below was getting louder. She moved toward the stairs. At the top of the landing, she stopped. Below her, in the main study, through the partially open door, she could see Raphael standing with his phone in his hand, and she could see by the particular rigidity of his posture and the color in his face that something had arrived ahead of schedule. The Ferreira meeting wasn't at 11. It had happened early. And whatever the Ferreira family had told Raphael Moretti at that meeting had changed his timeline from tomorrow morning to right now. She stood at the top of the stairs and listened to the man who had called her weak discover that the ground beneath his feet had already been moved. She stood at the top of those stairs and did not move. Below, through the study's partially open door, Raphael's voice was still carrying sharp, clipped, the particular staccato of a man issuing instructions he'd already decided on before the conversation began. She couldn't see who he was talking to. She could see his hand, the way it gripped the phone, the white at his knuckles. Then she heard a second voice. Not a phone call. Someone was in the study with him. She moved down 3 steps carefully, keeping her weight to the left side of the staircase, where the older wood didn't creak. She'd learned that specific detail in the one tour of the estate she'd been given 2 months ago, during a weekend visit when Raphael had walked her through the property with the proprietary ease of a man showing a woman what she was being offered. She had cataloged it then out of habit and was using it now out of necessity. 3 more steps. The voice resolved itself. Luca Ferreira was 29 years old, the youngest son of the Ferreira family's current patriarch, and the one who handled what everyone referred to as the operational side, a phrase that covered a significant amount of territory, and was never examined more closely in polite company. Alara had met him twice. Both times he had been pleasant in the watchful, coiled way of someone who has been trained to seem pleasant. He was not seeming pleasant now. The timeline moves, Luca was saying. That's what I'm telling you. It's not my decision. It's my father's. The window he agreed to gave you 6 weeks of overlap before we restructured the arrangement. That window is now conditional. Conditional on what? Raphael's voice. On the situation with your father being resolved cleanly. What happened today is not clean. I'm handling it. You watched it happen in a cathedral, in front of every significant family on the East Coast, and then you went and sat in a corner for 3 hours. That's not handling it. A pause. Alara held very still. The arrangement stands, Raphael said. His voice had dropped. Not calmer, more compressed, the way pressure drops before something breaks. My father's involvement in the operational structure is nominal. Has been for 2 years. The actual relationships, the cash routing, the contacts in the Port Authority, all of that runs through me. That doesn't change because of a marriage. It changes, Luca said, because your father just married a Vaimont, and Gerald Vaimont has a federal attorney who's been very quietly consulting on a case that my family has an interest in. Silence. Alara processed it a half-second ahead of Raphael, apparently, because she heard him go still in the particular way people go still when information arrives that rearranges a significant portion of what they thought they knew. How long, Raphael said slowly. Have you known about Vaimont's attorney? Long enough. How long, Luca? 8 months. Maybe 9. It wasn't relevant until today. It wasn't. Raphael stopped. Started again. You've been sitting on that for 9 months. My father sits on things until they're relevant. It's why he's been running a successful operation for 30 years without a single federal charge. A pause. It's also why he's concerned about what your father might do with that information channel now that he's made a permanent alliance with the Vaimont family. My father doesn't know about the port contacts. Are you certain? The silence this time was different. Alara recognized it, the sound of a man doing rapid, desperate inventory of everything he'd said done, and allowed within earshot of another person over a long period of time, and arriving at an answer that was not the one he wanted. I need 48 hours, Raphael said. You have until tomorrow morning. That's not enough to. Tomorrow morning, Lucas said. My father wants confirmation that your family's situation is stabilized, or he begins unwinding the arrangement. That means the port contacts go elsewhere. The routing shifts and the financial architecture we've been building for 2 years gets attributed. A pause. To the Moretti family's account, specifically to transactions that occurred when you were the operational lead. The room went completely silent. Alara's hand found the staircase railing. You would do that, Raphael said. Not a question. The flat recognition of someone who has just seen the walls clearly for the first time. My father would do that, Lucas said. There's a difference. It's not personal. Everything about this is personal. No. Everything about this is business. You're the one who made it personal today. A movement, the sound of someone standing, chair scraping. Tomorrow morning, Raphael, my father's very patient. But he's been patient long enough. Footsteps. The study door opened fully. Alara had exactly 2 seconds to decide what to do. She went up, not down, back up the stairs, quickly and silently, and she was around the corner of the landing by the time Luca Ferreira walked into the entrance hall below. She heard him cross to the front door. She heard it open and close. She stood in the upper corridor with her back against the wall and her heart doing something complicated and fast inside her chest. She went to find Dominic. He was in the East Wing sitting room, a smaller room off the main corridor that functioned as a private office on the occasions when the actual study was occupied by other things. The door was open. He was on the phone, standing near the window, his posture the same controlled stillness she'd been cataloging all day. He saw her face when she came through the door and ended the call without a closing word. Luca Ferreira was just in the study, she said. Dominic set the phone on the desk. She told him everything. Verbatim, in the same methodical way she'd told him about the hallway that morning, because that approach had worked once, and she had no reason to abandon it. She watched his face as she talked. He let her finish without interrupting. When she stopped, he said, "Sit down." "I don't need to." Alara, not harsh, just direct. "Sit down for a minute." She sat. He moved to the window and stood with his back to her, for a moment not shutting her out. She understood instinctively, but thinking. The kind of thinking that required stillness and a fixed point. "The port contacts," she said. "You know what those are?" "Yes." "They're yours, the transactions. They're attributed to the Moretti family. They're attributed to the operational period when I was running the business directly, which overlaps with the financial records I told you about earlier." He turned from the window. His face was composed, but something beneath it was working. She could see it. Luca Ferreira's father has had this ready for some time. Question is whether he intended to use it regardless of today, or whether today accelerated a decision he was approaching anyway. Does it matter? It matters for what comes next. He sat down across from her. If this was always coming, then Raphael is a tool they're using to clean up a loose end before they walk away from the arrangement entirely. Today accelerated it, then there's still a negotiation possible. Alara thought about Luca's voice, the texture of it, the way he'd said my father's very patient, with a quality that was less reassurance and more reminder. "I don't think it was always coming," she said. "I think today broke something. The way Luca talked about the cathedral, it mattered to them. The visibility. They needed Raphael's position to be stable and obvious, and what happened today made it the opposite of that. So they're moving to protect themselves, and they're willing to take Raphael with them if he doesn't deliver by morning." Dominic looked at her. "You're reading it the same way I am. I listened for 8 minutes through a staircase. You retained all of it." "I retained most things," she paused. "Attorney." "My father's attorney. You were going to call my father tonight about using that channel. The Ferreira family knows about it. Then using it directly is compromised." He nodded. "We need another route. Do you have one?" He was quiet long enough that she understood the answer before he gave it. "There's someone," he said slowly. A woman named Carla Mendez. I mentioned her earlier, the federal investigator. She's been building a case against the Ferreira operation for 5 years. Patient, thorough, the way Luca described his father. Close. What she's missing is documentation of the portside transactions, specifically the financial routing that ties the Ferreira family to the infrastructure, not just to the product. The records Rafael has on me are a byproduct of those exact transactions. Ilara saw it immediately. They implicate both families. The Ferreira exposure is significantly deeper. Mendez gets the full record set. The Moretti transactions are a footnote. The Ferreira infrastructure is the story. Then we give her the full set. Ilara said it plainly, the way you state a fact. Dominic looked at her. That means giving her records that implicate me. Records you said you can't defend in a courtroom. Yes, but records that would, in context, function primarily as evidence against the Ferreira family. The right framing. He paused. And with someone who makes contact in the right way. Mendez is careful. She won't take information from anyone connected to either family without questioning the chain of custody. Then she needs to receive it from someone she doesn't connect to either family. Ilara's mind was moving quickly now. The way it moved when a problem had a shape she could work with. Someone who came into this situation today. Someone with no prior operational history with either the Moretti or Ferreira organizations. Dominic looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. Solves the problem. You've been married to this family for approximately 8 hours. It means I have no footprint in any of their records. I'm a Vaymont by origin. Mendez will know the Vaymont name. My father has done federal consultation work, as you said. Credible point of origin for someone who came across information and wanted to do the right thing with it. It also puts you directly in the line of fire if anything goes wrong. I'm already in the line of fire, she said. I was in the line of fire the moment I proposed this marriage. I'm not standing behind it, Dominic. I'm standing in it. He was very still. You're not what I expected, he said. You keep implying that. I keep meaning it differently. He stood, moved to the desk, opened a drawer. He produced a USB drive, small, plain, the kind available in any office supply store, and set it on the desk between them. Copy. Rafael has the original, which he thinks is the only copy, which he got from a man named Peretti, who worked for the Moretti accounting operation 8 years ago, and sold that information to Rafael 3 years ago, when Rafael was building his leverage position. Ilara stared at the drive. Peretti made 2 copies, Dominic said. He gave one to Rafael. He gave the other to me. She looked up. He gave it to you. He came to me first, 2 days before he went to Rafael. He told me what he had, and he told me what he was planning to do with it. I paid him for the copy, and I thanked him for the advance notice. And then I let Rafael buy the other copy and believe he had leverage. Because a son who believes he has leverage over his father is a son who doesn't go looking for other ways to exert pressure. He paused. It worked. For 3 years, Ilara looked at the drive, at the desk, at the man standing on the other side of it. You've been managing him, she said, for 3 years. The entire time. I've been managing the situation. It's the same thing. He didn't argue the point. He's going to come to you tonight, Ilara said. Not in the morning. He's not going to wait until 9 because he can't afford to. He's going to come to you in the next hour, and he's going to make the threat with whatever he has left, and he's going to make it in front of me if he can. Probably. So what do we do in the next hour? Dominic picked up the drive and held it out to her. You call your father. Not about the attorney, you call him directly, personally, and you tell him you need to meet with someone tomorrow morning, and you need him to make the introduction. Mendez trusts Gerald Vaymont because Gerald Vaymont has been clean for 30 years. She'll take a meeting with his daughter. Ilara took the drive. It was lighter than it should have been, for something carrying this much weight. And when Rafael comes, she said, Let me handle Rafael. Dominic, I've been handling Rafael since he was 17 years old, he said. Not angry, just factual, with something underneath the fact that was too compressed to read. Let me do this part. She put the drive in her pocket. She looked at him for a moment. Is there anything else, she said, that I should know? Any other thing you've been holding that becomes relevant in the next 12 hours? He met her eyes directly. There is one thing, he said. She waited. Sophia is coming, he said. My daughter. I called her from the garden. This afternoon you were already back inside with the bridesmaids. She was in Paris, not Barcelona. She'll be here by 2 in the morning. You told her to come. I told her what was happening, and she told me she was already on her way. There's a difference. He paused. Sophia has a relationship with the Mendez investigation. Not officially. She was interviewed as a witness in a collateral matter 18 months ago. She and Mendez have an understanding. Ilara absorbed that. Your daughter, she said slowly, has been building a relationship with the federal investigator who's been looking into your family's business. Yes, with your knowledge, with my knowledge. He looked at the window, the dark garden beyond it. Sophia told me, about 2 years ago, that the Ferreira arrangement was going to end badly, and that the only way to control the ending was to choose it ourselves. I told her she was being dramatic. He paused. She was not being dramatic. No, Lara said. She wasn't. He turned back. She's going to want to meet you. I'll meet her. He seemed to search for a word. Unfiltered. She says what she thinks. Good, Ilara said. I've had enough of the other kind today. She called her father from the East Wing sitting room, while Dominic went to deal with something in the main office. Gerald picked up on the first ring, which told her he hadn't been sleeping. She told him what she needed. Gerald was quiet for a long moment. Carla Mendez, he said. You know who she is, Dominic told me. And he has documentation that would be of interest to her. I have documentation, Ilara said carefully, that I came into possession of through my marriage, which happened today. The chain of custody is clear. Her father made a sound. Ilara, Dad, this is... He stopped. What you're describing puts you in a position that is not recoverable if it goes wrong. If it goes wrong, we're in a worse position anyway. The Ferreira family has a timeline of tomorrow morning. Rafael is going to threaten to expose the family records to federal authorities tonight. If those records reach anyone the Ferreira family controls before we get them to Mendez, the framing goes the wrong direction. Gerald was silent. You know Mendez, Ilara said. Not well, but you know her. She'll take a call from you. At 11 o'clock at night. Yes, another silence, longer. I'll call her, Gerald said. I'm not promising she takes the meeting. Get her on the phone. I'll promise the rest myself. A pause. You sound like your mother. I'll take that, Ilara said. She heard him move, the sound of him crossing whatever room he was in, the small sounds of a man settling into the work of something he'd already decided to do. Give me 20 minutes, he said. She sat in the East Wing sitting room, with the USB drive in her hand, and waited. She heard Rafael before her father called back. He came through the main entry, and she heard the sound of him moving through the house fast, not careful. The gait of a man who had stopped managing his own behavior. She heard him call his father's name, once, twice. The third time louder. She stood. She walked out of the sitting room into the corridor, and she came around the corner at the same moment. Rafael appeared from the other direction, and they stopped 8 feet apart in the wide main corridor of the East Wing with the house quiet around them. He looked terrible. She registered it without satisfaction. The careful presentation of the morning, the perfect suit, the controlled face had come undone in the past few hours, in a way that was visible and specific. His eyes were too bright. His jaw was doing something rigid and intermittent. He was still wearing the morning suit minus the jacket, and the white shirt had a quality of exhaustion to it, like the fabric itself had given up. He looked at her the way people look at something they're trying to decide how to use. Where is he? Rafael said. I don't know, she said, which was true. She'd left Dominic 3 minutes ago and hadn't tracked where he'd gone. Get out of my way. I'm not in your way. I'm standing in the corridor. His jaw worked. You've been busy tonight. I've been getting acquainted with the house. Don't do that. Don't do the calm thing right now. He took 2 steps toward her, not threatening, more like he couldn't hold the distance anymore. You have no idea what you've walked into. What you've done today has consequences that you... I understand the consequences. You don't. You've been in this world for 14 months, and you think that makes you... I've been in this world my entire life, she said. My father's world is not so different from your father's world. The vocabulary is a little different. The mechanisms are a little different. Principles are the same. She held his gaze. Power and leverage, and who controls what and who knows what about whom. I grew up at that table, Rafael. I just sat at the kids' end of it, which meant I watched more than I talked. That turns out to be useful. He stared at her. Luca Ferreira was here tonight, she said. Something moved through his face. I heard the conversation, she said. I was on the stairs. His face went very still. The port contact, she said. The routing attribution. The morning deadline. She watched him process what she was telling him that she knew, that she'd known for the better part of an hour, and that he was only now finding out that she knew. Luca's a good talker, but he has his father's habit of spelling things out completely. Probably useful most of the time. Tonight it was useful for me. Rafael's hands were doing something at his sides. Tightening, releasing. The involuntary physical inventory of a man deciding what comes next. What do you want? He said. Flat, stripped of everything except the question itself. I want you to think very carefully about what you do in the next few hours. It's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting right now. She held his eyes. Your father is going to deal with the Ferreira situation. Not because of you, independent of you. Whatever you were planning to use as leverage tonight, it doesn't work the way you think it does, because the situation has changed since you made the plan. He looked at her for a long time. You've been working with him, he said. Tonight, since the reception. I've been talking with my husband, yes. The word landed. She watched it land. You've been married for 8 hours, he said. Long enough. Raphael's voice dropped. Not softer, more concentrated, the way heat concentrates before it burns. I have records, Elara. Documentation of things that will end his ability to operate in this city. I am going to take those records to people who will use them, and when they do, everything your father negotiated this alliance to protect will be gone. Your family's position, the Vaymont connection to Moretti operations, all of it goes with him. And the Ferreira family's exposure, she said, the deeper exposure. The portside infrastructure that ties the Ferreira operation to 20 years of distribution routes. What happens to that when the full record set reaches the right audience? He went very still. Because that's what's actually in those records, isn't it? She said. The Moretti transactions are the visible layer. The Ferreira infrastructure is underneath. Anyone thorough enough to look past the first layer finds the whole architecture. She kept her voice even. Which means using those records against your father also exposes the Ferreira family to a degree they have never been exposed before. And if the Ferreira family believes you're about to do that, I would never, Rafael. She said his name quietly. You told Luca Ferreira tonight that you're handling the situation. He goes back to his father and tells him that. His father thinks about what handling the situation might mean in the context of a man who is desperate and cornered and out of options. What conclusion does he reach? She watched his face go through the calculation she'd just handed him. They think you're going to use the records regardless, she said, to save yourself. And the only question for them is whether they move first. Raphael's breathing had changed. It was faster now, shallower. You have until morning, she said. That was Luca's timeline. But I don't think you have until morning. I think his father is making decisions right now, in the next hour, based on what Luca reported from tonight's conversation. How do I? He stopped. He looked at her with something that was not quite a request, not humble enough for that, not stripped down enough, but that was adjacent to it. The look of someone who has run out of directions, except the one they least expected. What do I do? She looked at him. In another version of this day, she might have felt something at the sight of that question on his face. In another version of this morning, in another life, she might have been standing next to this man at an altar, and the question might have meant something about what they were to each other. She didn't feel anything particularly. Step back from the record, she said. Tonight. Don't make any contact with anyone who works for the Ferreira family between now and morning. And when you sit across from your father at 9 o'clock tomorrow, tell him the truth about the Ferreira arrangement. All of it. What you built, what you agreed to, what you promised them. I know what he'll do, she said. Do it anyway. Raphael looked at her for a long moment. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Her father. I have to take this, she said. She stepped past Raphael in the corridor, close enough that she could have touched him, and she answered the call and brought the phone to her ear. Her father said, She'll meet you. 8 a.m. There's a coffee shop on Vesey Street. I'll send the address. She wants to see the documentation before she commits to ace anything, but she'll meet. Thank you, Elara said. Elara. Her father's voice was careful. Be sure about this, I'm sure. She ended the call. She turned. Raphael was still standing in the corridor. He was watching her with an expression that she would spend a long time afterward trying to name precisely, and the closest she would ever get was this. It was the face of a man who had built his entire understanding of another person on a fundamental error, and who was only now, in this corridor, at this hour, in the ruins of everything he'd thought he controlled, beginning to understand the full dimensions of that error. Get some sleep, she said. She walked away from him toward the east wing. Behind her, she heard nothing. Not footsteps, not his voice. Nothing. The house settling around her in the dark, and the USB drive in her pocket, and 8 o'clock on Vesey Street, and the particular absolute silence of a man standing alone in a corridor, finally understanding that the woman he'd called weak had, while he wasn't watching, moved every piece on the board. And somewhere below, a door opened. A car had arrived. Through the tall window at the end of the corridor, Alara saw the headlights cutting across the dark garden. Sophia Moretti had come home. The headlights swept across the garden and died. Alarfa stood at the end of the corridor and watched the car door open below a dark rental, practical, the kind of car chosen by someone who needed to get somewhere fast and didn't care what they arrived in. The figures that stepped out moved the way certain people move when they're used to airports and unfamiliar houses, and arriving in the middle of situations that are already in progress. Quick, certain, carrying one bag. Sophia Moretti looked up at the house. Even from the second floor, even through glass, Alara registered the quality of that look, assessing, unsentimental, the scan of someone who wants to understand the geometry of a place before they enter it. Then Sophia's gaze moved upward and found the window, found Alara standing at it, and she stopped. 1 second, 2. Then she walked toward the door. Alara came down the stairs. Dominic was already in the entrance hall. She didn't know where he'd materialized from, but he was there, and the quality of his face when his daughter came through the door was the first entirely unguarded thing Alara had seen from him all day. Not soft exactly. More like the specific relaxation of someone who has been holding a posture for hours and only now allows one muscle to release. Sophia dropped her bag and crossed the entrance hall and put both arms around her father with the directness of someone who doesn't manage physical affection, just extends it. He held her for a moment. Then she stepped back and turned, and Alara found herself being examined with the same thoroughness that had been applied to the house from the driveway rapid, specific, taking inventory. Sophia was 31 and looked it in the best possible way, not young, not old, but present in her own face the way people are when they've stopped trying to be anything other than what they are. Dark hair, her father's eyes, a quality of contained energy that was almost visible, like something running just below the surface of her skin. "You're Alara," she said. "Yes, I've read about your family. Not recently when I was researching the Alliance, about a year ago." Sophia's English was perfect, American inflected, with something else underneath it that wasn't quite an accent, but was a texture. "I told my father the Vaymont Alliance was the right move. I didn't think this was how it would happen." "Neither did I," Alara said. Sophia looked at her for another moment. Then something in her face settled, a decision made quickly and cleanly. "Okay," she said. "Tell me where we are." They went to the East Wing sitting room, the three of them, and Alara laid it out. All of it the Ferreira timeline. The morning meeting with Mendez, the drive, Raphael in the corridor. She kept it sequential and factual, and she watched Sophia listen, the way Dominic listened, which was without interruption and without the performance of reaction. When Alara finished, Sophia looked at her father. "The Mendez meeting," she said. "Alara's going alone?" "With Gerald Vaymont making the introduction by phone," Dominic said. "It's not enough." Sophia's voice was flat. "Mendez is careful. She's not going to take documentation from someone she's never met based on a phone introduction, regardless of whose name is attached. She needs a face she recognizes." She paused. "I'll go." "Sophia, I know her, Dad. We've sat across a table. She looked at me for 3 hours 18 months ago, and I didn't give her anything she could use, and she knew it. And she respected it anyway, because the thing she was actually looking for wasn't what I had." Sophia's hands were in her lap, completely still. "What I had was information about the Ferreira infrastructure, specifically the port-side routing. I didn't give it to her because I didn't have documentation. Now there's documentation." The room was quiet. Alara said, "You've been building toward this." Sophia looked at her. "Yes. For how long? Since I understood what the Ferreira arrangement actually was." She said it without apology, without drama. "About 3 years." Alara looked at Dominic. He was looking at his hands. The same posture as the garden, the internal look, the man examining something that is happening inside himself. "You knew," Alara said to him, "that she was building toward this." "Expected," he said. "I let her. Because you needed it not to come from you." He said nothing. "You needed the Mendez contact to be clean," Alara said. "Someone who could approach her without Moretti fingerprints. Someone who could be credibly positioned as a witness rather than a participant." She looked at Sophia. "And your daughter fit that exactly." Sophia's mouth curved, not quite a smile. "He never asked me directly. I think that was deliberate." "It was," Dominic said. "So you had plausible." "Yes." The three of them sat with that for a moment. Then Alara said, "We go together. Sophia and I, 8 o'clock. She looked at Dominic. "And you handle the 9 o'clock meeting with Raphael." That was already the plan. "The plan is better now." She stood. "Get some sleep, both of you." She looked at Sophia. "There's a room, your room, apparently, since your clothes are in it." Sophia looked mildly amused. He gave you my room. He said you leave things. I leave things everywhere. Sophia stood, picked up her bag. She paused, looking at Alara with that same rapid assessment. You proposed this marriage? Yes, this morning, in a garden, 3 hours before the ceremony. Yes, based on one conversation. And 14 months of watching Raphael operate, Alara said, which was the more informative of the two data sets. Sophia was quiet for a moment. Then my mother left when I was 9. My father raised Raphael and me alone. Raphael learned from my father that power is something you perform. I learned that power is something you build. She tilted her head slightly. I think you understand the difference. Yes, Alara said. I do. Sophia nodded once. She walked out. The house went quiet. Alara lay in the room that was now hers, not Sophia's room. She'd moved to the adjacent one after a brief and wordless negotiation with a member of the household staff who had accepted the change without apparent surprise, and she stared at the ceiling and did not sleep. Try. She lay still and let her mind run through what was coming: the meeting, the documentation, the 9 o'clock confrontation between father and son that she would not be present for and could not control. She turned the drive over in her hand in the dark. Small, plastic. The weight of 8 years of complicated decisions compressed into something she could close her fist around. She was still holding it when she heard the sound. Downstairs, specific. The kind of sound that doesn't belong to a house, settling too deliberate, too directional. The sound of something being moved. She was on her feet before she'd consciously decided to be. She came down the back stairs, not the main staircase, the narrow service stairs at the east end of the wing, that she'd identified during her earlier movements through the house. She was in the corridor by the study before she could hear voices. 2 of them, Raphael and someone she didn't recognize. She got close to the study door, slightly open, the same crack as earlier in the evening, this house apparently incapable of keeping its doors fully shut, and she looked through. Raphael was at the desk. The study desk, Dominic's desk, the one with the locked drawer that Dominic had opened with a key from his pocket earlier. The drawer was open now. Raphael had something in his hand, a folder, thick, the kind of folder that contains physical documents rather than just digital files. The second man was standing near the window, mid-40s, heavy through the shoulders, wearing a jacket that didn't fit quite right in the way that jackets don't fit quite right when there's something underneath them on the left side. Not Ferreira. She didn't know him, but she recognized the quality of his presence, the way he was positioned relative to the door, the way his eyes moved without his head moving. She recognized it because she'd grown up watching her father's security staff do the same thing, and this man was performing the same function. Raphael had brought someone in. Not family, not Ferreira, someone else entirely. The drive is the key, Raphael was saying. He was going through the folder quickly, pulling pages, scanning. Without the digital record, the paper trail alone is circumstantial. Anyone can argue paper. The drive, the man says it, where he had it. It'll be in this office, or Raphael stopped. He looked at the drawer. He looked at the folder. Something in his expression shifted. It was here. It was in this drawer. It's not there now. I can see that. Raphael's voice went tight. He moved it. Or he stopped. Alara pressed back against the wall outside the door. The drive was in her pocket. She could feel it. Raphael said very quietly she was in this office tonight. The second man moved away from the window. Alara went. She didn't run. Running made sound, and sound was the problem. She moved fast and carefully back down the corridor toward the east wing stairs, and she was at the base of the stairs when she heard the study door open fully behind her. Check east wing, Raphael said. She went up. She woke Dominic by pressing her hand flat against the bedroom door, 2 knocks, her palm, no voice. She heard him move. The door opened in 4 seconds, which told her he hadn't been sleeping either. She said at low volume, Raphael has someone in the house. Not family, not Ferreira. He's looking for the drive. Dominic's face did something rapid and controlled. How many 2 that I saw, armed the second one. Yes. He moved back into the room, and when he came back to the door, he had his phone, and a different quality of attention, the same composure, but operating at a different speed now, something underneath it that had engaged. Go to Sophia's room, he said. Lock the door. Don't open it until I knock. What are you going to, Alara? His voice was low and absolute. Go. She went. Sophia answered the door before Alara finished knocking awake, dressed like she'd been sitting on the edge of the bed, waiting for something to happen. She read Alara's face in a single look and stepped back to let her in. Alara locked the door. She told Sophia in 6 sentences. Sophia said the drive. Alara held it up. Sophia said, give it to me. Why? Because if they get through that door, you're the one they're actually focused on. They know who you are. They don't know what I know. Sophia held out her hand. Give it to me. Alara looked at her for 1 second. She gave her the drive. Sophia crossed her bag, opened the inner lining, not a pocket, the actual lining, separated from the outer layer, with what appeared to be a deliberate interior modification, and pressed the drive into it. Smoothed the lining back. The bag looked ordinary. She sat back down on the edge of the bed. Now we wait, she said. They heard it 14 minutes later. Not in the east wing, somewhere in the central part of the house, on the ground floor. Door. Then voices overlapping, too many to separate into individual words, through 2 floors of solid construction. Then a pause. Then a single sound that was short and hard and that Alara's body identified before her mind did, because her body was faster that way. Sophia's hand came out and closed around her wrist. Not hard. Just present they sat. The voices got louder, then stopped. Then footsteps on the main staircase. More than 2 people. Then Dominic's voice, directly outside the door, Alara. She looked at Sophia. Sophia nodded. She unlocked the door. Dominic was in the corridor with 2 men she recognized as house security, both of whom she'd seen during her earlier tour of the estate, stationed at the property perimeter. His face was composed. His left hand had a cut across the knuckles that was bleeding steadily onto the corridor floor in small rhythmic drops that he appeared to be completely unconcerned about. The man from the study, he said. He's contained. Raphael is in the front room. Alara looked at his hand. It's fine. He said it with the flat certainty of someone who has sustained significantly worse and knows the difference. The man he brought in was disarmed. He'll be escorted off the property in the next 20 minutes. Who is he? Someone Raphael contracted independently, not connected to either family's regular operations. His jaw tightened slightly, which tells me Raphael has been building something separate, resources that exist outside the family structure. Your father knew, Sophia said from behind Alara, about the independent structure. He's known for about 8 months. Dominic looked at his daughter. Told you, Sophia said. Last December. You said it wasn't confirmed. It wasn't. It is now. The corridor was quiet for a moment. What happens to Raphael, Alara said. He stays here tonight. Dominic's voice was even. In the morning, he sits across from me at 9 o'clock, and he tells me the truth. He paused. All of it. And if he doesn't, Dominic looked at her directly. Then I make the decisions without his input. She looked at the blood on his hand, looked at his face, looked at the quality of stillness in him that she'd been calibrating against all day, the stillness of a man who has done hard things before and has made a private accounting of them, and continues. Go clean that up, she said. His mouth shifted, not quite a smile. Yes, she did not sleep. She lay in the dark and let the hours move and thought about 8 o'clock on Vesey Street and the USB drive in Sophia's bag lining, and what Carla Mendez would look like across a coffee shop table and what it would mean to hand over documentation. That implicated her husband of 14 hours in federal matters to a federal investigator, and whether that made her someone who had done the right thing or someone who had made a calculation and dressed it up. She decided it was probably both. She was awake when her phone showed 5:47. She was dressed by 6:15. She was downstairs with coffee by 6:30, sitting at the kitchen table alone. She was on her second cup when Sophia came in at 6:50 with the bag over her shoulder, and the particular wakefulness of someone who also hadn't slept and had processed it differently, sharper, more energized, like insomnia had handed her something useful. Ready? Sophia said. Yes, Alara said. They went. Vesey Street at 8 in the morning was the particular controlled chaos of lower Manhattan. On a weekday, the suits and the coffee carts and the automatic movement of people who made this commute every day and had reduced it to pure muscle memory. The coffee shop was small, corner location, the kind of place that had been there long enough to be invisible to everyone who walked past it. Carla Mendez was already inside. She was 50, maybe 52, with the kind of face that gave nothing away, by default not cold, not warm, just professionally neutral in the way that some people develop after years of sitting across tables from people who are trying to read them. She was in a dark blazer over a gray shirt, and she had a coffee she hadn't touched, and she stood when they came in. Her eyes went to Sophia first, recognition, then to Alara. The assessment there was different, longer, more layered. The assessment of someone who had been briefed in the last 12 hours and was now measuring the briefing against the reality. They sat, no pleasantries, Gerald Vaimont called me at 11:15 last night, Mendez said. He told me his daughter had documentation relevant to an active investigation and wanted to meet. She looked at Ilara. He sounded like a man who wasn't certain this was the right move, but had decided it was the necessary one. That's accurate, Ilara said. You got married yesterday. Yes, to Dominic Moretti. Mendez's voice gave nothing to the name, no judgment, no emphasis. The fact being confirmed. Yes, and you came into possession of documentation within that marriage. Within 14 hours of it, Ilara said. The documentation originates from a financial record set created approximately 8 years ago during the period when Dominic Moretti was the direct operational head of the Moretti family business. The records document transactions that, in their surface reading, involve Moretti family accounts. She paused. The deeper structure of those transactions documents the financial infrastructure of the Ferreira family's distribution network, specifically the portside routing that connects the Ferreira operation to the eastern seaboard supply chain. Mendez looked at her for a long moment. You understand, she said, that anything you give me gets used where the evidence leads. I don't manage what it implicates based on whose family you married into yesterday. I understand that, and you're giving me this anyway. Yes. Mendez looked at Sophia. Sophia opened her bag and reached into the modified lining without any visible hesitation, and she placed the drive on the table between them. Mendez looked at it. She didn't touch it yet. Why, she said. To Ilara. Directly. Ilara thought about the question honestly, the way it deserved to be answered. Because the Ferreira family has a timeline of this morning, she said. They gave Rafael Moretti until 9 o'clock to stabilize what happened yesterday. If he can't do that, and he can't, they're going to move to protect themselves. The way they protect themselves is by repositioning the Moretti family as the primary target of exactly the kind of investigation you've been running. She held Mendez's gaze. If they get to frame the story before you do, you're 5 years of work points in the wrong direction. This, she nodded at the drive, is the correct direction. Mendez was very still. The Moretti exposure in those records, Ilara said. You'll see it. It's real. It should be accounted for. She paused. But it's not the story. Mendez looked at her for a long, specific moment. Then she reached out and picked up the drive. They were back at the estate by 8:40. Ilara came through the front door with Sophia behind her and crossed the entrance hall and was halfway to the east wing stairs when she heard Raphael's voice from the direction of the main study. Not controlled anymore. She heard Dominic say something she couldn't make out. She heard Raphael's response, and the response was loud and fractured, and going in several directions at once: accusations, threats, something about the records, something about what he deserved, something about 30 years of building something and getting nothing. She stopped in the corridor. Sophia stopped behind her. They listened. Dominic's voice came again, low, steady, the voice that didn't need volume to fill a room. She caught fragments. Your choice is not mine. I didn't take anything from you. You gave it away. Every single piece of it, you gave it away yourself. Raphael said something about the Ferreira family, about the records, about what he had. And Dominic said, you had a copy. There are things you don't know about what else exists and where it is. A silence. Then Raphael's voice, stripped of everything now, just the raw question underneath all of it. What did you do? And Dominic, what needed to be done? Ilara stood in the corridor and felt the morning shift around her, and felt the weight of the last 22 hours pressing against the inside of her chest, felt the specific exhaustion of a person who has moved through an impossible day on nerve and clarity alone, and is only now, in this quiet corridor, beginning to understand what she's actually inside of. She heard Raphael say his father's name once. Just the name, and then nothing. The silence from the study was the particular silence of something ending not with noise, not with drama, but with the specific, airless quality of a door closing on something that cannot be reopened. She waited. The study door opened. Dominic came into the corridor. He looked at her. She looked at him. It's done, he said. The meeting, she said. Mendez has the drive. Something moved through his face. Not relief more complex than that. The thing that moves through people when a decision they made a long time ago finally arrives at its conclusion, and they discover they were right to make it, which is not the same as being glad about it. Sophia said, she's here. Ilara tilted her head toward where Sophia had stopped 20 feet back. He looked past her at his daughter. Sophia met his eyes across the corridor with the specific, steady look of two people who have been having a long, patient, parallel conversation without ever quite saying it aloud. and who have now arrived at the moment where the conversation concludes. Raphael, Alara said, still in the study. Dominic looked back at her. He's not going to do anything. The leverage he thought he had, he understands now that it doesn't work the way he believed. How much does he know enough? He paused. Not everything. Enough. She looked at the study door. He'll try again, she said. Yes, not the same approach, no. He's not stupid. A pause. He's reckless and he's entitled, and he genuinely believed for a long time that the world would reorganize itself around what he wanted. But he's not stupid. When the current approach fails completely, he'll find a different one. So we're not done. We're not done, Dominic said. Today's problem is solved. Tomorrow's is different. Alara nodded. She looked at the corridor, at the house around her, at the September morning coming through the windows at the far end of the east wing, light falling across the floor in long, specific angles. She had been awake for 30 hours. She had proposed a marriage, stood at an altar, survived a reception, listened through 2 different staircases, handed federal documentation to a federal investigator, and was now standing in a corridor discussing what came next with the man she had married in what felt like another era entirely, but was in fact yesterday morning. She said, I need 4 hours. Dominic said, take them. She walked toward the stairs. At the base of them, she stopped, turned. Raphael had come out of the study. He was standing in the entrance to the corridor, not coming toward her, just standing there, and his face had the particular quality of someone who has been emptied out by the last hour and is now existing in the space where anger used to be, which is usually a worse space. He looked at her. She looked at him. She waited. He said very quietly, was any of it real? The last 14 months. She considered the question honestly, because it deserved that. Some of it, she said. The parts where you forgot to perform. There were moments. She held his gaze. They weren't enough. He looked at her for a long time. Then he looked away. She climbed the stairs. Behind her, she heard nothing. No footsteps, no voice. Just the house, and the morning light, and the specific silence of a man standing in the place where everything he thought he owned used to be, looking at the distance between who he'd believed himself to be and who he had actually, in every measurable and consequential way, turned out to be. At the top of the stairs, before she turned down the corridor, Alara heard the front door of the estate open. She stopped. She heard voices outside, more than one, arriving together with the particular controlled urgency of people who have come on official business and are not planning to wait. She looked down from the landing. Through the tall entrance hall window, she could see a car she didn't recognize, and behind it another, and the quality of the men stepping out of them was something she registered instantly and completely. The way they moved, the way they fanned out across the approach, the specific way they dressed to be both anonymous and unmistakable. Federal. Mendez had moved faster than she'd expected, and in the entrance hall below, Raphael had heard it too, because she could see him there, standing at the base of the stairs, looking at the front door with a face that had gone past every layer of performance and arrived at the thing underneath all of it. He turned and looked up at her. She looked down at him. The doorbell rang. The doorbell rang a second time. Nobody moved for 3 full seconds. Alara at the top of the landing, Raphael at the base of the stairs, the house holding its breath around both of them, while the morning light came through the tall windows and made everything look cleaner than it was. Then Dominic came out of the east wing corridor. He crossed the entrance hall without hurrying, without any visible adjustment to his pace, and he looked up at Alara once, a single, direct look that carried more information than most people managed in a full sentence, and then he opened the front door. Carla Mendez was standing on the step. Behind her, 2 men in the particular anonymous professional dress of federal agents, and behind them the cars Alara had seen from the landing. The morning beyond them was bright and ordinary, the estate grounds quiet, the city beginning its Tuesday in the distance with complete indifference to what was happening inside this house. Mr. Moretti, Mendez said. Ms. Mendez. Dominic's voice was even. Come in. She came in. Her eyes moved through the entrance hall with the same efficient inventory Alara as seen in the coffee shop, cataloging, filing, registering Raphael at the base of the stairs with something that was not surprise. She had known he was here. She had planned around knowing it. Raphael looked at Mendez and understood immediately what she represented, not just who she was, but what her presence this morning meant in terms of sequence and timing, and who had moved first. Alara watched the understanding arrive in his face and watched what it did there. It didn't break him. She'd expected something more dramatic than what actually happened. which was simply a kind of settling, like a man who has been braced for impact, finally feeling it arrive and discovering that the bracing was the worst part. He looked up at Alara. She came down the stairs. Mendez asked for a room. Dominic gave her the study, the same study where the drawer had been opened and the folder had been searched the night before, the same room where the 9 o'clock meeting had happened an hour ago, the same room where Raphael had sat across from his father and been told that the ground he'd built his leverage on had already been moved. The room had absorbed a significant amount of this house's recent history and showed none of it. Mendez took the room. Her two agents positioned themselves in the corridor outside. She did not ask anyone to leave, she asked, specifically for Dominic and for Alara, which told Alara that Mendez had already decided something about the shape of this conversation before she arrived. Raphael she asked to wait. He waited. Alara saw his face when Mendez said it, the specific, precise indignity of a man who has spent his entire adult life being the one who makes other people wait, being told to do exactly that. He sat in the entrance hall chair with his hands on his knees, and he waited. Sophia appeared, from somewhere she'd been in the kitchen apparently, making coffee with the calm practicality of someone who understands that crises still require caffeine, and she set a cup on the entrance hall table near Raphael without comment and went back to the kitchen. He didn't touch it. Inside the study, Mendez put the drive on the desk between herself and Dominic and looked at him for a moment before she said anything. I've had my team run a preliminary pass, she said. 2 hours this morning, which isn't enough to build a case, but it's enough to understand the architecture. She paused. The Ferreira infrastructure is exactly what you've been sitting on. Yes, Dominic said. And the Morty transactions, also exactly what they are. Mendez looked at him steadily. You understand that what's in here creates exposure for you. I do. The two statutes, I'm looking at the ambiguous ones. To use a charitable word, both carry significant weight. I know what they carry. Mendez looked at Alara. You gave me this knowing that. Yes, Alara said, within 14 hours of the marriage. The timing doesn't change the content. Mendez was quiet for a moment. She had a stillness that Alara respected, the stillness of someone who makes decisions carefully and has learned that hurrying them costs more than the time saved. Here is what I can offer, Mendez said. Not a deal, I don't make deals in living rooms. As a statement of investigative priority. She looked at Dominic. The Ferreira family has been the primary target of this investigation for 5 years. The documentation on this drive confirms and substantially deepens the case against that operation. The Moretti transactions are real, and they will be noted, and they will be part of the record. She paused. But I'm not going to burn 5 years of work chasing a secondary target when the primary one is now within reach. It's not a favor. That's how investigations work. Dominic said, what do you need from me? A formal interview. Documented. On the record. She said it without flinching. Everything you know about the Ferreira port operation, the contacts, the routing, the timeline of the arrangement. Not what's on the drive. What's in your head, which I suspect is considerably more than what's in any document. The room was quiet. Alara watched Dominic's face. He was looking at the drive on the desk, the small, plain object that had been in a locked drawer, and then in her pocket, and then in a bag lining, and then in Mendez's hand, and was now sitting on the desk of his own study, like something that had always been moving toward this moment and had simply arrived. When, he said. Today, Mendez said. This morning. I have a room available downtown. He looked at Alara. She gave him nothing, no direction, no signal. This was his, and she understood that clearly. She had moved things into position. The choice that mattered was his. He looked back at Mendez. Give me 20 minutes, he said. He used 15 of them. He went upstairs and he came back in a jacket, and he looked entirely like himself, composed, certain, moving at the same unhurried pace that Alara had watched all day yesterday and was already learning to read the variations in. He paused in the entrance hall and looked at Sophia, who was standing near the kitchen doorway with her coffee, and they exchanged the look that had been running between them since the corridor. The night before the long, patient, parallel conversation finally spoken plainly in a single glance. Sophia nodded once. He looked at Raphael. Raphael was still in the chair. He'd picked up the coffee at some point. The cup was in his hands, held with both palms, the posture of someone using the warmth of it as something to hold on to. Dominic stood in front of his son and looked at him for a moment without speaking. Raphael looked up. I'm going downtown, Dominic said. When I come back, you and I are going to have a conversation that I should have forced 3 years ago, about what you built outside the family structure and why and what it cost and what comes next. He paused. Today. I'll tell you when. Raphael's jaw moved. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you stay on this property. You make no contact with the Ferreira family. You make no contact with the man you brought into this house last night. He wasn't Raphael. The name landed flat and final. I know exactly who he is and who contracted him and when. We'll discuss it later. He looked at his son for one more moment. Don't make anything worse today. You've done enough. He walked to the door. Mendez and her agents followed. The door closed. The entrance hall was very quiet. Alara stood in the entrance hall with Raphael, and the closed door and the coffee cup, and the specific, exhausted silence of a house that had been through too much in too short a time. She was 31 hours awake. Her body knew it in specific, unromantic ways, the particular weight behind her eyes, the way sounds were slightly sharper than they should be. The feeling that the edges of things were more defined than usual, which was her nervous system compensating. Raphael set the coffee cup down on the table. He looked at her. The drive, he said. You got it out of the study last night. Yes. Before I came looking. Yes, he absorbed that. You heard me talking to Luca. I was on the stairs. And before that, the study, earlier in the evening. You were in there with my father. We had a conversation, yes. He was quiet for a moment. Working through the sequence, she could see him doing it, reconstructing the evening from his end of it, filling in what had been happening on the other side of every wall and closed door and assumed absence. You've been 10 steps ahead of me, he said. Not accusatory anymore. Something flatter than accusation, the observation of a man doing an honest accounting. I had information you didn't know I had, she said. That's not the same as being ahead, isn't it? She looked at him. I heard you through a door yesterday morning. That's where it started. If you hadn't been careless enough to have that conversation 3 hours before your own wedding, none of this would have happened the way it happened. You think I don't know that? I think you know it now. He looked at the floor, at his hands. He had the quality of someone who has arrived somewhere, after a very long journey, and is now simply sitting in the arrival, not moving yet, not ready to think about the next direction. Vivian, he said. The name dropped into the silence differently than she expected. What about her? Alara said. Where is she? I don't know. She left the reception last night. I assume she went home. He nodded slowly. She called me at 6 this morning, he said. Before everything else happened. Before Mendez. He was looking at something on the floor that wasn't there. She wanted to know if I was all right. Alara said nothing. I didn't answer, he said. She waited. I didn't answer because I didn't know what to say. He stopped. He made a sound that was almost a laugh and landed nowhere near one. I've always known what to say. It's the one thing I've always been able to do. He looked up. And I picked up the phone, and I looked at her name, and I couldn't put together a single sentence. What would you have said? Alara asked. Not cruelly, genuinely. Thought about it. I don't know. He looked at her steadily. That's the honest answer, and I'm aware that for a man who spent 6 months telling her things I should have been telling my fiancé, not knowing what to say to her is... He stopped again. Doesn't make me a good person. No, Alara agreed. Doesn't. It makes me someone who used 2 people badly and is now in a house he no longer has any standing in, talking to a woman who has every reason to never speak to him again. He held her gaze. I'm not asking for anything. I just want to say that what I called you in that room wasn't what I believed. Not actually. I think I needed to believe it because the alternative was understanding that you were the person in that situation with the most clarity, and I was the one who was. He stopped. Afraid, she said. He blinked. What? You called me weak because it frightened you that I wasn't. She said it simply, without heat. Men who are genuinely confident don't spend energy deciding that the people around them are less capable than they are. They don't need to. She held his gaze. You needed to. The entrance hall was very quiet, Raphael said. Just that. One word in the voice of someone who has stopped managing the conversation and is just inside it. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she said, I'm going to sleep. I'll be in the east wing. Don't come into that corridor today. She walked to the stairs. He didn't say anything else. She climbed the stairs and went down the corridor and into the room that was hers now, and she closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed and put her face in her hands, and stayed like that for about 30 seconds. Then she lay down. She was asleep in 4 minutes. She woke to voices downstairs. The light through the window had moved late afternoon, the particular slant of it that meant several hours had passed. She lay still for a moment, registering herself back into the day, and then sat up. Her phone showed 4:17. She had 7 missed calls, 3 from numbers she didn't recognize, 2 from her father, 1 from a number identified only by a first name she'd stored months ago and had almost forgotten, and 1 from Vivienne. She looked at Vivienne's number for a moment. Then she set the phone down and went to wash her face. Dominic came back at 5:40. Alara heard the car from the East Wing sitting room where she'd been for the last hour, working through what the next several weeks were going to require in the systematic, list-oriented way that was her natural mode when everything else was stripped away. She heard the front door and heard voices, his and someone else's, brief, then the sound of the second person leaving, and then footsteps on the stairs. He knocked on the sitting room door, she said. "Come in." He looked tired. It was the first time she'd seen it on him clearly, not the managed tiredness of the night before, but something more genuine. The bone-level tiredness of a man who has spent a day in a room with federal investigators, going over 8 years of decisions, one by one. He sat down in the chair across from her. She waited. 6 hours, he said. Mendez is thorough, I know. The Ferreira case, she has enough now. The drive plus the interview. She said it won't move fast. These things never do. He looked at his hands. The cut across his knuckles had been cleaned and taped at some point. But it will move. And the Morty exposure is being handled through an attorney. Not Gerald's attorney, someone separate. Mendez was accurate in what she told us this morning. The Ferreira case is the priority. The Moretti transactions will be addressed, but the frame is cooperation, not prosecution. He paused. I won't escape it without consequence. There will be financial penalties at minimum. Possibly more, depending on how the case develops. Alara nodded. You knew that when you gave her the drive, he said. Yes. You gave her evidence that creates legal exposure for your husband. 14 hours into the marriage. I gave her evidence that kept a worse outcome from happening. The consequences to you are real, but they're bounded. What the Ferreira family was going to do with those records if they got there, first would have been unbounded. She met his eyes. I made a calculation. I think it was correct. He looked at her for a long moment. So do I, he said. That doesn't make it a small thing that you did. She held his gaze. I know it isn't. The sitting room was quiet. Outside, the estate grounds were going gold in the late afternoon. The September light, doing what September light does when you're not paying attention to it, making everything look briefly like the best version of itself. Raphael, she said. Still here, he was in the study for most of the afternoon, alone. He paused. Sophia talked to him for about an hour. I don't know what was said. Is that unusual? The two of them talking. They don't talk often. There he considered. Too similar in some ways and too different in others. Sophia builds things. Raphael acquires them. They've never fully understood each other. He looked at the window. She went to him, though. She chose to go to him today. Alara thought about that. About Sophia setting a coffee cup next to Raphael in the entrance hall that morning, without comment, without warmth, without coldness, just a cup of coffee set down next to a person who was sitting alone. She's not cruel, Alara said. No, neither is he at his foundation. He's selfish, and he's been careless with people, and he made choices over the last 3 years that I can't defend and won't. He said it levelly, without the performance of parental grief, just the statement. But cruelty isn't what drives him. Entitlement does, fear does. He spent 20 years being told he was going to inherit something great, and he built his entire identity around that, and then he spent the last 3 years watching me not step back, and the fear of losing it made him. He stopped. Made him into someone who would sell the family to the Ferreira operation to secure his own position, Alara said. Dominic was quiet. That's what the arrangement was, she said. He didn't just take their money. He gave them access. Port contacts to the routing, to infrastructure that exists because you built it over 30 years. He was going to hand it over because they promised him protection if you ever step back. Yes, Dominic said. Did you know that before today? I knew the broad shape of it. The detail came out in the conversation this morning. He looked at his hands. He justified it to himself. He's good at that, the justification. He told himself it was just a parallel operation, that it didn't compromise the family's core structure. He told himself he was being strategic, a long pause. He told himself you would never be more than a useful wife who wouldn't cause trouble. The word landed between them. She let it sit. He was wrong about one of those things, she said finally. Dominic looked at her, and for the first time in 36 hours, she saw something in his face that wasn't composure or strategy, or the measured response of a man who has spent decades, controlling what he allows to be visible, something that was simply and directly there, without management. He was wrong about all of them, Dominic said. She called her father at 6. Gerald answered in the voice of a man who had also not slept much and had been thinking about it. How are you, he said. Functional, she said. Mendez got what she needed. I know, she called me. Professional courtesy, a pause. She's going to move on the Ferreira operation within the week. The documentation is solid enough that she doesn't need to wait, and the Moretti exposure being managed. I spoke to Dominic's attorney this afternoon. Another pause longer. Elara, what you did this morning, I know, she said. It was I know, Dad. He was quiet for a moment. She could hear him breathing the specific quality of a parent on the phone with a child who has done something that required more courage than the parent knew they had, and is now trying to find the right words for that and coming up empty. Your mother would have. He stopped. Yeah, Elara said quietly. They sat in that for a moment. Is it are you all right there? He said. At that house. With those people. She looked out the sitting room window at the estate grounds. The garden where she'd sat on a stone bench 36 hours ago in her white silk gown with wet mascara and a destroyed morning. At the hedgerow where Dominic had come around the corner and sat down without being asked. Yes, she said, I'm all right. He's treating you. Treating me like someone whose judgment he respects? She said. That's what I wanted. That's what I have. Her father exhaled. That's not nothing, he said. No, she agreed. It isn't. She called Vivienne back at 6:45. She hadn't decided to until she was dialing, which was how she knew it was the right moment. The decisions that arrive without announcement are usually the ones that have been made at a level beneath the deliberate and are simply surfacing. Vivienne picked up on the first ring. She said, Elara. Just the name. The way you say a name when you've been rehearsing having the conversation, and all the rehearsal falls apart the moment the actual moment arrives. Hi, Elara said. A silence. I saw the news, Vivienne said. About the investigation. The Ferreira thing. It's already on. I know. Are you? Vivienne stopped. That's a stupid question. I'm sorry. I don't know how to. She stopped again. I've been sitting here all day, trying to figure out what to say to you, and I don't have anything. I don't have an explanation that works. I know that. I'm not calling for an explanation, Elara said. Then why are you calling? Elara thought about it. Outside the window, the garden was going dark, the light fully gone now, the September evening doing what evenings do, the estate settling into its own quiet. Because we were friends for 6 years, she said. And that was real, even if some of the last part of it wasn't. And I didn't want the last thing between us to be you standing in a hallway, not meeting my eyes. She paused. That's all. Vivienne was quiet for a long time. I loved him, she said finally. I believe you. It doesn't make it, Elara said. It doesn't. Another silence. The kind that has weight but isn't hostile, just honest. Two people standing on either side of something that happened and acknowledging the shape of it. I think we can't. Vivienne started. No, Elara said. We can't. Okay. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Vivienne said very quietly, You looked beautiful. Yesterday, in the dress, a pause, before I knew. I thought when I was fixing your veil, I genuinely thought you were about to have the morning you deserved. Elara closed her eyes for a second. Thank you, she said. I'm sorry, Elara. I know, she ended the call. She sat with the phone in her hand for a while, looking at nothing. The grief she'd identified, the night before, the specific, unromantic grief of losing someone who had been genuinely present in her life, sat in her chest without dissolving. She didn't try to dissolve it. Some things deserved to stay exactly as heavy as they were for exactly as long as they needed to be. She found Dominic in the kitchen at 7:30. He was at the counter with a glass of water and a folder of documents he was apparently reading. With the focused attention he gave everything, and he looked up when she came in without the slight adjustment people make when they're caught in something private. He just looked up. Sophia made something, he said. It's on the stove. Elara looked at the stove. A pot. She lifted the lid and found soup, something dark and substantial, and clearly made from whatever was available in the kitchen. The way food gets made when someone needs to do something with their hands. She served herself a bowl. She sat at the kitchen table. After a moment, Dominic closed the folder and sat across from her. They ate, she ate. He sat with his water in the quiet of the kitchen. And outside the window, the estate was fully dark now. And somewhere in the house, Sophia was doing something that involved occasional footsteps overhead. And Raphael was somewhere else, entirely being whatever he was figuring out how to be. What happens to him? Elara said. Practically. His position in the family business. Changed, Dominic said. Not ended. He knows the operations well enough that cutting him out entirely would be wasteful and also cruel, and I don't have the taste for either. He paused. He'll have a role. Not the one he expected. Not the one he was promised. He looked at the table. He'll have to build trust back. That takes time. He may not have the patience for it. He might surprise you, he might. Dominic looked at her. You're being generous. After everything. I'm being accurate. He's not a fixed thing. Neither are people usually. She looked at her bowl. He had a moment this morning in the entrance hall where he stopped managing the conversation and just told me the truth. That's not nothing. She paused. It doesn't undo anything. It's not nothing. Dominic was quiet. The Ferreira exposure, she said. When that case moves, it's going to create pressure on anyone associated with the arrangement. Raphael's connection is documented but peripheral, Dominic said. He was the contact point, but the transactions ran through accounts that the Ferreira family controlled. Mendez is aware of the distinction. He paused. She's thorough. She's also fair. In the technical sense of the word, she follows what the evidence actually says, rather than what it would be convenient for it to say. Good at her job. Very. Alara finished the soup. She set the bowl down and looked at the table for a moment. I want to be involved, she said. In what comes next. The operational decisions, the legal strategy, the family's response to the Ferreira situation as it develops. I want to be in the room. She looked at him directly. I'm not asking to be handled, she said. I'm not asking to be managed or protected or positioned in a comfortable corner while the real conversations happen elsewhere. I made decisions in the last 36 hours that affected this family in significant ways, and I made them without full information, and they turned out to be correct, but they might not have been. I don't want to be making decisions without full information again. Dominic held her gaze. You want access, he said. I want to be trusted with access. That's different. She paused. I know we don't know each other. I know this marriage is 36 hours old, and neither of us has any basis yet for the kind of trust that takes years. I'm not claiming something I haven't earned. She looked at him steadily. I'm saying I want to earn it. The kitchen was quiet. Outside the estate, the dark garden, the city in the distance living its ordinary evening. You already made a start, Dominic said. That was necessity, she said. What I'm next is choice. He looked at her for a long moment, the same direct, unhurried look she'd been receiving from him since a garden bench 36 hours ago, the look that she'd identified early as the specific quality of a man who actually saw what was in front of him rather than what he expected to see. All right, he said. She nodded. He looked down at the folder he'd closed. Then he opened it and pushed it across the table toward her. Start here, he said. It's the summary of the Mendez interview. The attorney prepared it this afternoon. He paused. Tell me what you notice. She pulled the folder toward her. She began to read. 3 weeks later, the Ferreira family's primary operation was frozen by federal order pending investigation. The news moved through the city's particular underground the way significant things always move faster than the official channels, layered with interpretation, assessed and reassessed by everyone who had any standing to have an opinion. The Moretti name appeared in the surrounding coverage, the way peripheral things appear present, noted, not centered. The attorneys managed it, the framing held. Antonio Ferreira's response was swift and furious and aimed at Raphael specifically, whom he'd publicly identified as the source of the documentation in a statement through his own attorneys that everyone in the relevant world read and that no one with access to the actual facts believed because the timeline didn't support it, and Mendez had built her case with the kind of structural integrity that made misdirection very difficult to sustain. Raphael read the statement. He was in the East Wing study, his father's study, the room he now used, with a different quality of permission than he'd once operated with. Quieter, less proprietary, and he read it and sat with it for a long time. And then he went and found Alara. She was in the main office, the one overlooking the garden. He knocked. She said, "Come in." He stood in the doorway with the statement in his hand and looked at her and said, "Ferreira is putting it on me." "I know," she said. "We expected that. He's going to make it public. Whatever he can find." "He can't find anything that holds," she said. "The documentation chain is clean." Mendez built the case from the drive forward, and the drive came from inside this marriage, which means the chain of custody points here, not to you. He looked at her. "You protected me," he said. "When you gave her the drive. You did it in a way that he stopped. You didn't have to. I know." "Why?" She looked at him for a moment. "Because making your life difficult wasn't the goal. Stopping the Ferreira arrangement from destroying this family was the goal." She paused. "You're part of this family. Even now. Even with everything. He stood in the doorway. He didn't say thank you, the word was too small for what was in his face, and he seemed to know it. He just stood there for a moment, and then he nodded once, and he went back down the corridor. She watched him go. Then she turned back to the window. 6 months after the wedding that rewrote itself, on a March evening when the city below was deciding whether spring had arrived, Alariso stood at the window of the top-floor office with a cup of coffee going cold in her hand and looked at the lights coming on across the skyline. She heard Dominic come into the office behind her. She heard the specific quality of his footsteps, which she had learned over 6 months the way you learn any repeated thing, not consciously but completely, until the knowing is a physical fact rather than a thought. Stopped beside her at the window. They looked at the city together. Mendez called today, he said. The Ferreira trial date is set. When 8 months. He paused. She said the case is solid. She said it in the way she says things when she means them. Ilara nodded. The attorney says our exposure clears well before that, he said. Penalties are significant, not crippling. I know. I read the filing. He was quiet for a moment. I know you did. You read it before I did. He said it without any quality of complaint, just acknowledgement. You were in a meeting, she said. With the Castellano people. Yes. He paused. They're asking if you'll be present at the next one. They asked specifically. The elder Castellano asked for you by name. She turned slightly to look at him. He said, you're the clearest thinker in the room, Dominic said. He said this at a table where he was sitting next to me. He was being generous. He was being accurate. Dominic looked at her. He's not a generous man. She turned back to the window. The city was doing what cities do in the early evening, the particular transition from working hours to something else, the shift in the quality of the light on all those buildings, all those lit windows full of people who were also standing in rooms they'd ended up in, through sequences of events they hadn't entirely planned. Raphael called me, she said. Dominic was quiet this afternoon. He called to tell me he'd finished reviewing the northern accounts, and he'd found an error in the third quarter projections that someone needed to look at before the Castellano meeting. She paused. It was a real error. He'd found it correctly. I know, Dominic said. He told me first. Then he called you. She registered what that sequencing meant, the specific choice of it, the order. He's trying, she said. Yes, it doesn't... No, Dominic said. It doesn't fix anything. But it's real. He looked at the window. Sophia says he's been different since February. She talks to him more now. He paused. I don't know if different is enough. I think it has to be up to him to find out. Alara thought about the entrance hall 6 months ago. Raphael with the coffee cup in both hands, the look on his face when he'd stopped managing the conversation. Some things are not nothing, she thought, even when they're not enough. He asked me, Dominic said quietly, about 3 weeks ago. He asked me if I regretted what happened on the wedding day. Turned to look at him. He meant the decision I made in the garden, Dominic said, not the ceremony. The moment where I said yes to what you proposed. What did you tell him? Dominic looked at her directly. 6 months she had been in this house, in these rooms, at these tables. 6 months of case files, and attorney calls, and family meetings, and the Castellano dinners, and the slow, unannounced process by which two people who had made a calculated decision begin to understand what they've actually made. I told him no, Dominic said. I told him it was the clearest decision I'd made in years. He paused. He asked how I could know that when I'd only spoken to you for 20 minutes. What did you say? I said 20 minutes was enough to know that you were someone who made decisions under pressure without losing the thing that makes decisions worth making. He looked at her. He asked what that meant. What did you say? I said it means you still knew what you actually wanted, even when everything was going wrong. That's rarer than people think. He was quiet for a moment. He didn't say anything to that. He just nodded. Alara looked at the window, the city, at the particular quality of the evening light on all those buildings. He thought about a garden bench in September, about white silk and fixed mascara, and a ring that wasn't the planned ring, and a man who had sat down beside her without being asked and listened to everything she said without interrupting once. She thought about what she'd been. 6 months ago, not naive. She'd never been naive, but certainly less calibrated. Less certain of the specific difference between the life she'd been moving toward and the life she was capable of building. She thought about Vivienne, who existed now as a different kind of thing, not a friend, not an enemy, but the name of something that had been real and had ended, and had left a specific shaped absence that she had stopped trying to fill and started simply carrying. She thought about Raphael in the study with the third quarter projections, finding the error and calling her name. She thought about Sophia in Barcelona. who called twice a week and argued about everything, and was the most intellectually alive person Alara had encountered in years, and who had said to her last month, without any preamble, "You're the best thing that happened to this family in a long time. I need you to know I think that." She thought about all of it. The whole 36 hours and the 6 months after it. The decisions she'd made under pressure and the ones she'd made in stillness. The things she'd given up and the things she hadn't known she was going to find. She turned away from the window. She looked at the man beside her, the gray at his temples, and the lines in his face and the cut on his left hand that had healed to a faint scar, and the steady, direct eyes that still gave her the same unmanaged attention they had given her in a garden on the worst morning of a life she no longer lived. "Ask me," she said. He looked at her. "Ask you what?" "You were going to ask something. Before you said all that." She held his gaze. "You had a question." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you regret it?" he said. "Not the Ferreira situation. Not the decision with Mendez. The garden, the proposal, the whole of it." She looked at him steadily. Outside the window, the city went on doing what it did indifferent, enormous, full of people standing in rooms they hadn't planned to be in, making something of it or not. She thought about the question honestly, the way it deserved. "No," she said. He held her gaze. "The morning I stood outside that door," she said, "and heard what I heard, that was the morning I lost something I'd been building toward for 14 months. Plan, a future that someone else had designed and I had agreed to occupy." She paused. "And then I went into a garden and I made a decision that was mine. Completely mine. No one handed it to me. No one shaped it. I built it in about 4 minutes out of nothing but what I actually was." She looked at him. "That's not a loss. That's the opposite of one." He looked at her for a long time. Outside the city, inside the room, the desk with its files, the window with its view. The particular quiet of two people who have moved through something together and are now, simply, standing on the other side of it. Dominic reached out and picked up her cold coffee cup and turned toward the kitchen without comment. "I'll make more," he said. She turned back to the window. The lights across the city were all the way on, now the full evening constellation of a skyline that had been here long before either of them, and would be here long after, indifferent and magnificent, and entirely unmoved by the small, consequential, completely human fact of two people deciding, without drama and without fanfare, that what they had built in the aftermath of a disaster was something worth continuing to build. She put her hand flat on the glass. The city went on below. She let it.